Hey everybody, this is Sleepy Crime, and today I'm gonna help you. I know you want to fall asleep to this video, so before you do, put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. By the way, where are you from and what time are you watching? Make yourself comfortable and relax. Lauren Spearer was born on January 17, 1991, in Westchester County, New York. She grew up in the affluent suburb of Scarsdale, where her parents, Robert and Charlene Spearer, raised her in a close-knit Jewish household. Lauren was known for her warm personality, petite frame, standing at just under 5 feet tall, and a distinctive heart condition requiring daily medication, which later became a critical factor in her missing person status. As a child, Lauren was active and social. She was known among friends and family for her enthusiasm and kindness. She attended Edgemont High School, where she excelled academically and built strong friendships. Those who knew her described her as friendly, loyal, and passionate about fashion. In 2009, Lauren enrolled at Indiana University in Bloomington, a major public research institution known for its vibrant student life. She majored in fashion merchandising through the university's School of Art, Architecture plus Design. There, she quickly integrated into the campus community, becoming involved with various student groups and maintaining close ties with friends from both her dormitory and classes. Lauren also became active in the local Jewish community, attending events at the Helen G. Simon Hillel Center. During her sophomore year, she studied abroad in Israel through a Birthright Israel trip, a formative experience that deepened her cultural and spiritual identity. The trip was not only a personal milestone, but also one that expanded her social network, introducing her to individuals who would later be part of the timeline surrounding her disappearance. In Bloomington, Lauren lived off campus in the Smallwood Plaza apartments. She was known for her sociability and often spent time with a group of friends that included both students and local residents. Among them was Jesse Wolfe, her boyfriend at the time, who also hailed from the New York area and attended Indiana University. Their relationship was well known within their circle, characterized by shared routines and mutual care, particularly concerning Lauren's health needs. Lauren was nearing the end of her sophomore year, in the spring of 2011. Her academic standing was solid, and she had expressed hopes of pursuing a career in the fashion industry after graduation. Her summer plans included an internship in New York City, where she intended to gain experience and reconnect with family. On the evening of Thursday, June 2, 2011, Lauren Spearer joined friends to celebrate the nearing end of the academic year. That night would be marked by a series of social interactions, movements across multiple locations, and decisions that would become central to the timeline of her disappearance. The evening began at her apartment at Smallwood Plaza, located in downtown Bloomington. Around 8:30 p.m., Lauren left with a friend, David Rohn, to visit another apartment at the nearby 5 North Townhomes, where they met up with a small group, including Corey Rossman, a fellow student with whom Lauren was friendly. The group consumed alcohol, and based on later reports, marijuana was also present. Around midnight, Lauren and several companions made their way to Kilroy's Sports Bar, a popular student venue known for its relaxed dress code and outdoor patio. Lauren was wearing a white tank top, black leggings, and no shoes, a detail that would later become emblematic in missing person flyers. Surveillance footage captured her entering the bar with friends. At Kilroy's, Lauren continued drinking. At one point during the evening, she removed her shoes and left her cell phone and handbag behind a counter at the bar, possibly to prevent loss or theft while socializing. This decision would become critical, as she would not return to retrieve them. Friends later described Lauren as appearing intoxicated but coherent during this time. By approximately 2:30 a.m., Lauren exited Kilroy's with Corey Rossman. Surveillance footage captured the two walking barefoot back toward her apartment complex. They were seen entering Smallwood Plaza shortly thereafter. There, they encountered another resident, Zach Oakes, in the hallway. According to statements, a verbal altercation occurred between Oakes and Rossman, during which Rossman was allegedly punched. Oakes later claimed Rossman appeared disoriented after the encounter. Lauren and Rossman then left her building and walked to his apartment at 11th and Morton Streets, a short distance away. Rossman's roommate, Mike Beth, reported that Lauren was visibly intoxicated and that Rossman was too impaired to continue the evening. Rossman was reportedly put to bed by Beth, while Lauren decided to leave the apartment on her own. She was then seen heading toward the apartment of another acquaintance, Jason Rosenbaum, located nearby. At Rosenbaum's residence, Lauren stayed for a short time. According to Rosenbaum's statement, she made a phone call to a friend, declined offers to stay the night, and left his apartment around 4:30 a.m. This moment marks the last known confirmed sighting of Lauren Spearer. She left without shoes, without a phone, and without her identification. The narrow window between when she exited that apartment and when her disappearance was discovered has remained a mystery. A gap filled with speculation, scrutiny, and years of searching. The early hours of June 3, 2011, marked the final confirmed movements of Lauren Spearer. The timeline between approximately 2:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. was pieced together through surveillance footage, witness statements, and phone records. This narrow 2-hour window has since become the focal point of the investigation into her disappearance. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Lauren and Corey Rossman left Kilroy's sports bar and walked to Smallwood Plaza, where Lauren lived. Surveillance footage from the complex captured their arrival. The pair entered through the main entrance, with Lauren barefoot and Rossman appearing unsteady. Inside, they encountered Zach Oakes, a resident and acquaintance. A verbal exchange escalated when Oakes noticed Lauren's state of intoxication and reportedly confronted Rossman about her condition. Accounts vary, but Rossman was allegedly punched during the exchange, and some reports suggest he was left disoriented. After leaving Smallwood Plaza without collecting her phone or shoes, Lauren accompanied Rossman to his apartment at 11th and Morton Streets. The journey between the two locations was brief. At around 3:30 a.m., Rossman's roommate, Mike Beth, observed that Rossman was heavily intoxicated and placed him into bed. Beth later stated that Lauren did not appear to be interested in staying and left shortly thereafter. From there, Lauren walked alone a short distance to the residence of Jason Rosenbaum, another student she knew. She arrived around 3:45 a.m. and remained there for approximately 45 minutes. Rosenbaum reported that during her stay, Lauren made a phone call to a friend and briefly rested on his couch. He also noted that she declined offers to spend the night. Around 4:30 a.m., Rosenbaum claimed Lauren left his apartment, heading south on 11th Street. That exit, according to Rosenbaum, was the last known moment she was seen. No surveillance footage has been released confirming her departure from his apartment, and no other witnesses have definitively placed her beyond that time. Lauren was barefoot, without her cell phone, purse, or ID. Her clothing remained the same, black leggings and a white tank top, and she carried no items. The absence of digital footprints after 4:30 a.m., combined with her lack of personal belongings, posed immediate challenges to tracking her movements. The area she was last seen in included residential buildings and parking lots, with limited camera coverage. Despite canvassing the area in the days and weeks that followed, investigators found no further footage or evidence of Lauren's presence beyond that point. This final timeline, precise yet incomplete, ends abruptly in the early dawn. The brief window of recorded events left behind questions that would only deepen with time. Where did Lauren go after leaving Rosenbaum's apartment? And what happened in the minutes and hours that followed? The investigation into Lauren Spearer's disappearance began within hours of her last known sighting. When Lauren failed to respond to texts and calls from friends and did not return home on June 3, 2011, concern quickly escalated. By that afternoon, her absence had been reported to the Bloomington Police Department. Given Lauren's medical condition and the fact that she was last seen intoxicated, without shoes or identification, the case was treated with urgency from the outset. Initial efforts focused on retracing Lauren's steps during the early morning hours. Police interviewed those known to have seen her last, including Jason Rosenbaum, Mike Beth, Corey Rossman, and others present at the 5 North Townhomes and Kilroy's Sports Bar. Investigators mapped out a timeline using surveillance footage from the bar, nearby apartments, and businesses. This footage confirmed several details, such as Lauren entering Kilroy's, leaving with Rossman, arriving at her building, and walking through downtown Bloomington. However, there was a critical gap. No cameras captured her movements after 4:30 a.m. Law enforcement officers conducted extensive searches in and around the area where Lauren was last seen. Drainage ditches, wooded areas, and nearby construction sites were examined. Aerial searches were conducted using helicopters and drones, while police on foot canvassed neighborhoods. Despite these efforts, no physical evidence, no clothing, belongings, or signs of a struggle was recovered. From the outset, investigators treated everyone who had interacted with Lauren that night as witnesses, not suspects. Voluntary cooperation was initially provided, with those involved offering accounts of their interactions with Lauren. As the investigation continued, however, some of these individuals reportedly retained legal counsel and declined further interviews. This shift led to growing frustration among Lauren's family and raised questions in public discourse about transparency and accountability. Authorities also appealed to the public for assistance. Tip lines were established, and the case received immediate media coverage throughout Indiana and in Lauren's home state of New York. Posters featuring her image, physical description, and last known outfit were distributed widely. Her distinctive appearance, small frame, blonde hair, and blue eyes became instantly recognizable within the community and beyond. Investigators collected data from cell towers, phone records, and social media platforms. However, Lauren's phone remained at the bar, significantly limiting digital leads. Her bank accounts and credit cards showed no activity after her disappearance. Searches of trash collection centers and water bodies were conducted as part of broader investigative efforts, but these too yielded no conclusive evidence. As days turned into weeks, the case grew increasingly complex. Without physical evidence or a clear suspect, investigators were left with a timeline that ended without resolution. The absence of a crime scene, the lack of witnesses after 4:30 a.m., and the limited availability of surveillance footage compounded the challenges. Despite intensive efforts, the investigation reached a standstill. Yet behind the scenes, law enforcement continued to work through leads, revisit interviews, and coordinate with outside agencies. The search for Lauren was far from over. It had only just begun. From the moment Lauren Spearer was reported missing, the public response was immediate and deeply engaged. Bloomington, a city home to thousands of students, rallied quickly. Friends, classmates, and complete strangers came together to aid in the search. Flyers were posted across campus and throughout the city within 24 hours. They featured Lauren's photo, a description of her appearance, and a plea for information. Her image, blonde hair, blue eyes, 5 feet tall, became instantly recognizable. Her parents, Robert and Charlene Spearer, arrived in Bloomington soon after receiving the news. From the moment they stepped into the public eye, they became the most persistent and visible faces of the effort to find their daughter. They spoke to media outlets, organized search efforts, and issued regular public statements urging anyone with information to come forward. Volunteers flooded in. Search parties were organized daily, including hundreds of local residents, students, and community members. They combed through wooded areas, creeks, fields, and alleys. A central command post was established to coordinate logistics, distribute maps, and provide supplies. Many searchers worked in difficult summer conditions, driven by empathy and the desire to assist. National media picked up the story quickly. News segments featured Lauren's disappearance alongside calls for information. Major networks covered updates from Bloomington, while interviews with the Spearers were broadcast across the country. Social media also played a significant role. Hashtags, digital flyers, and status updates about Lauren's case circulated widely on platforms like Facebook and Twitter, reaching an audience far beyond Indiana. A reward fund was established to encourage tips. As public attention grew, donations poured in, some from anonymous sources. Billboards bearing Lauren's face and appeal for information were erected along highways. The campaign emphasized the urgent need for answers and the ongoing mystery of her disappearance. Back in Bloomington, the Indiana University community remained heavily involved. Vigils were held, professors, students, and university staff shared stories, posted flyers, and participated in search efforts. Campus organizations offered support and hosted awareness events. A sense of shared loss permeated the town, a reminder of the vulnerability felt in a closely connected academic community. Yet, with heightened attention, also came pressure. Public scrutiny turned toward those last seen with Lauren. Media inquiries intensified. Questions were raised about gaps in timelines, levels of cooperation with investigators, and what, if anything, might have been withheld. As the investigation progressed without public breakthroughs, speculation flourished in online forums and news segments. Despite the challenges, the Spearer family maintained a composed and unwavering presence. They continued daily updates, engaged directly with both local law enforcement and national organizations focused on missing persons, and appealed repeatedly to the public conscience. Their message remained consistent. Someone knew what happened, and silence would not stop the search for answers. The public's role in Lauren's case, through search efforts, media amplification, and digital outreach, kept her disappearance in the spotlight long after the initial news cycle. Even as the weeks wore on, her image persisted in the national consciousness, becoming emblematic of the uncertainties and heartbreak surrounding missing persons cases in college communities. As the investigation into Lauren Spearer's disappearance progressed without a definitive breakthrough, theories began to emerge, both from the public and within law enforcement circles. The case's lack of physical evidence, contradictory witness statements, and abrupt end to her known movements fueled multiple lines of speculation, each examined for its plausibility and potential to unlock the mystery. One of the earliest and most discussed theories was that Lauren may have suffered an accidental overdose. She had been drinking heavily on the night of June 2nd and was seen with individuals reported to have engaged in recreational drug use. Some posited that Lauren could have overdosed in the company of others who, fearing legal consequences, chose not to call for help. This theory gained traction because of the lack of evidence suggesting abduction or struggle and the unusual absence of physical clues. Closely tied to the overdose theory was the possibility of concealment. If Lauren had died in someone's presence due to drugs or alcohol, it was suggested that her body may have been moved or hidden to avoid detection. Investigators explored this scenario by searching dumpsters, landfills, and bodies of water. Despite extensive efforts, no physical trace was ever recovered to support or disprove this hypothesis. Another theory considered was foul play at the hands of someone she knew. The last individuals to see Lauren alive, Corey Rossman, Mike Beth, and Jason Rosenbaum, became subjects of public scrutiny. While none were officially named as suspects, their behaviors and inconsistencies in retellings of that night drew attention. Investigators questioned their timelines and examined their properties. No evidence directly linked any of them to Lauren's disappearance, and each denied involvement. There were also broader theories involving stranger abduction. Though less supported by evidence, some speculated that Lauren could have been taken by someone she encountered after leaving Rosenbaum's apartment. The area where she was last seen, while primarily residential, was not immune to transient foot traffic. The absence of surveillance coverage in certain spots left gaps in the timeline where such an event could have occurred, though no witnesses reported any suspicious activity. Some members of the public proposed scenarios involving multiple actors, suggesting a conspiracy or coordinated effort to mislead investigators. These ideas, largely driven by online speculation, were scrutinized by authorities but produced no actionable leads. Investigators remained focused on verified movements and statements rather than conjecture. Throughout, law enforcement publicly emphasized that the case remained open and active. They reviewed new tips, consulted with forensic experts, and engaged external agencies for assistance. The FBI was involved at various points, providing resources for data analysis and search operations. Despite this, none of the major theories were confirmed. The theories surrounding Lauren Spearer's disappearance illustrate the central dilemma of the case. Numerous possibilities, none supported by conclusive evidence. Each hypothesis raised new questions, but none led to definitive answers. As time passed, these theories continued to circulate, reflecting both the enduring public interest and the persistent gaps in a case that remained unresolved. As months passed without a resolution in the case of Lauren Spearer, frustration mounted. The Spearer family, still without answers, began exploring legal avenues to obtain additional information. Their decision marked a shift in strategy, from relying solely on police investigations to using the civil court system in an attempt to compel cooperation from individuals associated with Lauren's last known hours. In 2013, Robert and Charlene Spearer filed a civil lawsuit for negligence against Corey Rossman and Jason Rosenbaum. The suit alleged that both men had a duty of care toward Lauren on the night she disappeared, and that their actions contributed to the circumstances surrounding her vanishing. According to the complaint, the defendants were aware of Lauren's intoxication and physical vulnerability, yet failed to ensure her safety. The Spearers contended that their negligence resulted in Lauren being placed in a dangerous situation, ultimately leading to her disappearance. The legal filing was significant in several respects. First, it publicly laid out a narrative of the final hours before Lauren went missing, based on witness statements and previously unreleased details. Second, it aimed to bypass some of the limitations investigators faced, using depositions, subpoenas, and discovery to compel testimony and documentation that had not been made available during the police investigation. Rossman and Rosenbaum, through legal counsel, denied all allegations and filed motions to dismiss the case. They asserted that they were not responsible for Lauren's disappearance and challenged the argument that they owed her a legal duty of care. Their attorneys argued that the events in question did not establish liability under existing negligent standards. In 2014, the federal judge overseeing the case dismissed it, ruling that Indiana law did not recognize a general legal duty in the context presented. The court determined that while the events were tragic, they did not meet the threshold for civil liability as defined by precedent. The ruling underscored the legal distinction between moral responsibility and actionable negligence, a gap that remains difficult to bridge in missing persons cases. Although the lawsuit was unsuccessful in court, it served a broader purpose for the Spearer family. It drew renewed attention to the case and applied public pressure on those who had remained largely silent after the initial investigation. For the family, it was not only about legal recourse, but about keeping Lauren's story in the public consciousness and maintaining momentum in the search for answers. The legal action also highlighted the limitations families face when confronting unresolved disappearances. With no suspects formally charged and with key individuals declining further interviews, civil litigation became one of the few remaining tools to seek accountability. In this way, the Spearers' approach reflected both determination and the desperation inherent in the absence of closure. While the lawsuit did not provide the resolution the family hoped for, it reaffirmed their commitment to uncovering the truth. In court, on the afternoon of February 19, 2008, 9-year-old Shannon Matthews vanished in Dewsbury Moor, West Yorkshire. She was last seen at 3:10 p.m. outside Westmore Junior School after returning from a school swimming trip. When Shannon failed to return home, her mother, Karen Matthews, reported her missing to the police at 6:48 p.m. The disappearance prompted a significant police response. West Yorkshire Police initiated a search operation, deploying over 200 officers and 60 detectives. The investigation included door-to-door inquiries, searches of local areas, and public appeals for information. The case drew national attention, with comparisons made to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. As the search continued, the community rallied together, distributing posters and organizing volunteer search parties. Despite extensive efforts, Shannon remained missing for 24 days, leading to growing concern and speculation about her whereabouts. The search for Shannon Matthews rapidly expanded into one of the most extensive in West Yorkshire's history. Police, aided by mountain rescue teams, divers, and sniffer dogs, combed through homes, gardens, parks, and wastelands. Over 1,500 properties were searched. CCTV footage from the area was reviewed, and more than 3,000 people were interviewed. Posters with Shannon's photograph and details were pasted across towns and broadcast through the media. Community volunteers in Dewsbury Moor formed search parties, checking local woods, alleyways, and derelict buildings. Local businesses contributed resources, and many residents stayed out late into the night. A dedicated incident room was established, and Shannon's case was soon classified as a Category A investigation, usually reserved for high-risk missing persons. Public appeals featured Karen Matthews tearfully pleading for her daughter's return. A £50,000 reward for information leading to Shannon's safe recovery was offered, contributed by the Sun newspaper and later increased with additional donations. Politicians voiced concern, and Shannon's school remained a focal point for inquiries. As days passed without progress, detectives re-interviewed those closest to Shannon, attention increasingly turned to the movements of family members and their associates. Police began covert surveillance and utilized listening devices. While maintaining the public front of a hopeful search, authorities privately grew suspicious of inconsistencies in the statements given by Shannon's mother and others. The operation's scale was unprecedented in the region, sustained over 3 weeks of uncertainty. Despite the intensity, no significant leads emerged, and Shannon's fate remained unknown. Media coverage of Shannon Matthews' disappearance intensified as the days turned into weeks. National newspapers and television stations reported daily on developments, broadcasting appeals and theories. The image of Shannon, red-haired with a shy smile, became instantly recognizable across the UK. Her story resonated with many, especially given the comparisons made to the high-profile case of Madeleine McCann, which had occurred less than a year earlier. Karen Matthews became a central figure in the media narrative. She appeared in press conferences, clutching a teddy bear and tearfully urging for Shannon's return. Public perception initially leaned towards sympathy. Karen was portrayed as a struggling mother of 7, living in a tight-knit but economically disadvantaged community. Coverage often emphasized the solidarity of the Dewsbury Moor residents who organized vigils and helped with searches. The reward for information was widely publicized, contributing to the growing interest. Celebrities added their voices to the calls for Shannon's safe return. However, as time passed and no progress was made, questions began to surface about the family's background and Karen's personal life. Elements of Karen's behavior, such as her demeanor in interviews and inconsistencies in her timeline, began to draw quiet scrutiny from some media outlets and investigators alike. Public sentiment started to shift subtly. While the community remained hopeful, the lack of concrete leads led to speculation. The pressure on the police increased, and behind the scenes, officers were reevaluating initial assumptions. The case was no longer just a search for a missing child. It had become a national conversation about class, parenting, and the reliability of appearances. As the search entered its 3rd week, the investigation reached a critical juncture. Detectives began focusing more closely on the details of Karen Matthews' statements. Discrepancies emerged around her account of the day Shannon went missing, prompting further interviews and the application of covert techniques. Surveillance was set up at her home, and officers monitored her phone conversations and meetings. One key focus became Michael Donovan, an acquaintance connected to Karen through her partner's family. Police discovered that Karen had been in contact with Donovan during the time Shannon was missing. Donovan, who had a history of mental health issues and lived alone in a flat in Batley car, became a person of interest. Investigators also started to detect patterns of behavior among Karen's social circle that raised concerns. Some individuals displayed evasiveness during questioning, while others seemed unusually informed about the progress of the investigation. The strain was evident. Karen's emotional displays appeared increasingly staged to officers closely observing her reactions. A strategic decision was made to bring in specialist interviewers trained in detecting deception. At the same time, financial records and phone logs were scrutinized. Authorities began to suspect that the disappearance might have been staged, possibly involving a ransom or an attempt to gain reward money. In parallel, Shannon's absence began taking a toll on the community's morale. Hopes of finding her safe were fading, and the case was beginning to shift from a hopeful rescue effort to a search clouded by doubt. Behind closed doors, the police were closing in on a theory that would shock the public once revealed. On March 14, 2008, 24 days after Shannon Matthews went missing, police found her alive. Acting on intelligence gathered during their investigation, Officers raided a flat in Lydgate Gardens, Batley Car. Inside, they discovered Shannon concealed in the base of a divan bed, hidden behind a panel. She was drugged, frightened, and physically unharmed, but emotionally subdued. The flat belonged to Michael Donovan. He was arrested on the spot and taken into custody for questioning. The rescue was a breakthrough, bringing relief across the country. However, the circumstances of her discovery immediately raised suspicions. Why had she been kept alive in secret, and who else knew? Shannon had been restrained and drugged to keep her quiet. Forensic tests later confirmed traces of sedatives in her system, including medications typically used to induce sleep or manage anxiety. In the following hours, she was taken into protective custody, placed under medical supervision, and closely monitored by child welfare professionals. Initial interviews with Donovan revealed inconsistencies and partial confessions. He claimed he had been coerced into participating in a plan orchestrated by Karen Matthews to stage a kidnapping and eventually find Shannon in return for the reward money. He described a plot that involved keeping Shannon hidden temporarily, only to later release her and claim credit. The revelation stunned the public. Karen Matthews was arrested 4 days later. The once sympathetic mother became a central figure in a criminal investigation that turned the case from a missing person mystery into a story of manipulation, deception, and betrayal. Following their arrests, Michael Donovan and Karen Matthews were interrogated separately. Donovan, under pressure, offered a narrative involving an agreement between the two to kidnap Shannon in a scheme to claim the reward money. According to his account, Karen had suggested the plan and had been in regular contact during the period Shannon was hidden. Investigators found evidence supporting this version. Text messages exchanged between Karen and Donovan during the time of Shannon's disappearance included instructions and updates. Surveillance footage and phone data placed them in contact at crucial points. Forensic analysis of Donovan's flat showed preparations made for a prolonged stay, including children's DVDs and food suitable for a child. Shannon, when interviewed by specially trained officers, described being kept inside the flat, rarely allowed to speak, and regularly given tablets. Her statements were consistent with the forensic findings. She was unaware of the reason for her confinement and expressed confusion and fear when questioned about her mother's involvement. Karen Matthews denied any role in the abduction. She insisted she had been deceived by Donovan and claimed ignorance of his actions. However, investigators pointed to the lack of genuine distress during her public appeals, discrepancies in her interviews, and her failure to ask about Shannon's condition after the rescue as indications of her duplicity. Further inquiries uncovered that the plot may have been influenced by media attention and the reward fund. Karen and Donovan believed they could secure a financial windfall by staging a dramatic rescue. The plan unraveled due to Donovan's erratic behavior and increasing police scrutiny. The investigation concluded that Shannon had been exploited in a calculated attempt to gain money and attention, orchestrated by those meant to protect her. The trial of Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan began in November 2008 at Leeds Crown Court. Both defendants faced charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. The prosecution argued that the pair had conspired to stage Shannon's abduction with the intent of claiming the reward money and gaining public sympathy. Key evidence was presented, including recordings of Karen and Donovan discussing aspects of the plan. The jury heard about the sedatives found in Shannon's system and the elaborate efforts made to conceal her in the flat. Testimonies from forensic experts, social workers, and law enforcement painted a picture of deliberate and sustained deception. Shannon's interview transcripts, while not read aloud in full, were summarized by the prosecution. She had described being kept quiet with sleepy medicine and said she was told to stay hidden. The flat's condition, with hidden compartments and signs of prolonged confinement, further supported the prosecution's narrative. Karen Matthews maintained her innocence, claiming Donovan had misled her. However, inconsistencies in her story and the weight of the physical and digital evidence weakened her defense. Donovan, in turn, claimed Karen was the mastermind, though his mental state and credibility were questioned. After weeks of testimony, the jury found both Matthews and Donovan guilty on all counts. In January 2009, each was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The judge described their actions as truly despicable, emphasizing the emotional harm inflicted on Shannon and the betrayal of public trust. The trial concluded with widespread public outrage. What began as a case of a missing child ended as an extraordinary example of criminal deceit and exploitation. The verdict and sentencing brought closure to a case that had captivated and appalled the nation. Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan were sent to separate prisons to serve their sentences. News of their convictions triggered intense media reaction and public debate. The betrayal of trust, especially by a mother, struck a deep chord with the public. In Dewsbury Moor, the mood shifted from sorrow to anger. Community members who had volunteered in searches and supported the family felt misled. Some expressed outrage at how resources had been used under false pretenses. Local officials acknowledged the community's efforts and resilience while addressing concerns about how the case had developed. The media continued to explore the social dynamics surrounding the case, focusing on poverty, parenting, and the influence of sensational coverage. Commentators examined the contrast between initial public sympathy and the final revelations. Some drew comparisons between the Matthews case and others involving missing children, noting how media narratives can shape perceptions. Child Protection Services launched internal reviews. Authorities assessed how Shannon and her siblings had been living prior to the incident. The children were taken into care and placed in secure environments, with Shannon receiving specialized support. Steps were taken to shield her from public exposure, and her identity was protected through lifelong anonymity orders. The case prompted questions about systemic issues, how social services had monitored the family, and how communities could better detect signs of distress. Though no direct failings were found, agencies acknowledged the need for improved coordination and early intervention mechanisms. Shannon's name faded from headlines, but the impact of her case remained a reference point in discussions about child welfare and the misuse of public trust. After her recovery, Shannon Matthews was placed under a secure care arrangement away from her family. Her location and identity were kept confidential to protect her from further trauma and media scrutiny. The authorities implemented a lifelong anonymity order to ensure she could rebuild her life privately and safely. Psychological assessments indicated that Shannon had been significantly affected by the experience. She displayed signs of anxiety, confusion, and distrust. Specialists in child trauma were assigned to support her recovery, focusing on stability and therapeutic interventions. Reports highlighted that she required time to understand the events and regain a sense of normalcy. Her siblings were also placed under protective care. Evaluations of the family environment prior to Shannon's abduction revealed concerns related to neglect, lack of supervision, and chaotic domestic conditions. These findings justified continued separation from parental figures, particularly in the wake of the convictions. In subsequent years, updates on Shannon were scarce, in line with legal protections. It was confirmed that she was placed with a foster family and later integrated into a new community. Education plans were adapted to accommodate her emotional needs, and her development was closely monitored by child welfare teams. For her own safety and well-being, Shannon was given a new identity. Public authorities emphasized the importance of privacy, urging the media and general public to respect legal boundaries. Any attempt to reveal her whereabouts or identity was subject to strict penalties. By all available accounts, efforts were made to provide Shannon with the opportunity for a safe and structured life. The priority remained her long-term recovery, away from the events that had defined her early childhood. The Shannon Matthews case left a lasting imprint on public consciousness and policy discussions in the United Kingdom. It became emblematic of a rare but deeply disturbing form of exploitation, one in which a parent had used a child as a tool in a scheme driven by greed and deceit. The story challenged assumptions about vulnerability, family trust, and the reliability of public narratives. In the years that followed, public reflection on the case extended beyond criminal justice. It sparked national conversations about social inequality, media responsibility, and the thresholds for state intervention in domestic life. Debates arose over how poverty and isolation can influence decision-making, and whether existing social systems provide sufficient safeguards for at-risk children. Media portrayals of the case continued to evolve. Documentaries, dramatizations, and retrospectives revisited the events with varying tones, some critical, others empathetic. They examined not just the crime, but the cultural context surrounding it. Questions were raised about how the media had initially framed Karen Matthews, and whether coverage was shaped by class-based bias. Authorities revisited protocols for responding to missing children. Though operationally effective in recovering Shannon, the case highlighted the need for stronger early warning indicators and improved interagency communication. Local councils and child welfare organizations conducted reviews to strengthen their ability to detect neglect and act swiftly. The anonymity order protecting Shannon remains in effect. Her name is occasionally invoked in public discourse, but without specific reference to her identity or location. For many, the case stands as a reminder of the complex realities behind headline tragedies. Ultimately, the legacy of Shannon Matthews is one of resilience, not only in her own recovery, but in the way her story prompted critical evaluations of how society protects its most vulnerable. Maura Murray was born on May 4th, 1982, in Hanson, Massachusetts, the fourth of 5 children in a close-knit family. Raised in a structured household led by her father, Fred Murray, Maura was taught discipline and perseverance from a young age. Her mother, Lori, and her siblings played central roles in her upbringing. Maura's early life was marked by academic excellence and a deep commitment to athletics, particularly long-distance running. She attended Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, where she distinguished herself both academically and athletically. Her abilities as a cross-country runner earned her statewide recognition and admiration. By all outward appearances, Maura was a disciplined and driven young woman, often described by those who knew her as bright, goal-oriented, and independent. Her high school years culminated in her acceptance to the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point. At West Point, Maura pursued chemical engineering and continued to compete athletically, balancing the intense demands of a military education with her personal ambitions. The regimented lifestyle suited her well, at least initially. However, her time at West Point was relatively short-lived. She left the academy in her second year after an incident involving alleged credit card misuse. The decision to leave West Point led her to transfer to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she continued her studies in nursing. At UMass, Maura seemed to rebuild her path. She maintained strong academic performance and secured a job at the campus security desk, where she worked late-night shifts. Her friends and professors described her as intelligent, diligent, and often quiet. Her relationship with her long-distance boyfriend, Billy Rausch, continued, and they stayed in frequent contact by phone and email. Although separated by distance, he was stationed in Oklahoma. The relationship appeared committed. Fred Murray remained actively involved in her life, visiting regularly and maintaining close communication. He supported her emotionally and financially, especially in managing her car, a 1996 Saturn sedan that had become increasingly unreliable. Maura's social circle included fellow nursing students, dorm mates, and work colleagues. She was known to spend long hours on her coursework and job responsibilities, often under stress but always managing to cope. By early 2004, Maura was entering the spring semester of her junior year. She had just returned from winter break and was reportedly making plans for the future. Yet beneath the surface of her seemingly structured life, subtle signs of strain were beginning to show. Events in the coming weeks would raise questions about her state of mind, personal struggles, and intentions, questions that still remain unanswered. As Maura settled into her spring semester at UMass Amherst, the pressures of her daily life began to accumulate. Between the demands of her nursing program and her late-night shifts at the security desk in Melville Hall, she appeared to be under growing stress. Friends later recalled that she seemed tired, preoccupied, and sometimes withdrawn, though nothing outwardly alarming suggested a major crisis. On the evening of February 5th, 2004, Maura was working the security desk when she received a phone call that reportedly left her deeply upset. A supervisor later found her in a disoriented state, nearly unresponsive and repeating the phrase, "My sister." The exact contents of the call remain unclear, and Maura's sister later said that no distressing conversation had occurred between them that evening. The discrepancy only deepened the mystery surrounding Maura's mental state during that time. In the days following the phone call, Maura's behavior grew more curious. On February 6th, Fred Murray visited Amherst, bringing along a friend and spending the evening with Maura. He helped her shop for a used car to replace her aging Saturn and gave her access to his own vehicle for the weekend. That night, after attending a party with friends, Maura borrowed her father's Toyota Corolla to return to campus. Around 3:30 a.m., on February 7th, she crashed the vehicle into a guardrail near the UMass campus. The accident caused significant damage to the front end. Police arrived, but no sobriety test was administered, and Maura was released without citation. Maura appeared apologetic and rattled by the accident. She arranged to file an insurance claim using her father's policy and spoke to him multiple times that day. Fred was reportedly more concerned with the damage than with any underlying cause, and the incident was handled routinely. However, when Maura returned to her dorm, she spent considerable time researching travel destinations in rural New Hampshire and Vermont, locations she had visited with her family in the past. She also inquired about lodging, including a phone call to a condominium rental service in Bartlett, New Hampshire. On Monday, February 9th, Maura took several steps that suggested preparation for an unannounced trip. She emailed her professors to inform them of a family emergency and said she would be absent for a few days. She also contacted the nursing school faculty to collect homework assignments. That morning, she used an ATM to withdraw nearly all the money in her account, around $280. and stop by a liquor store to purchase alcohol. By early afternoon, she had packed belongings from her dorm room, including textbooks, personal items, and printed directions to Vermont. A stuffed animal was left on her bed, and she reportedly placed some belongings in boxes, which some interpreted as a sign of departure. There was no indication that Maura had shared her travel plans with anyone. She did not inform her boyfriend, family, or friends about where she was going. The reasons for her departure and the choice of destination remained unknown. To those around her, Maura had not exhibited any overt signs of a breakdown, yet her actions pointed to a deliberate and secretive withdrawal. These choices, methodical yet cryptic, would become central to the case that would soon unfold. On the afternoon of February 9th, 2004, Maura Murray left the University of Massachusetts Amherst campus under a veil of secrecy. Her movements throughout that Monday were deliberate. Around 1 p.m., she withdrew $280, the majority of her available funds, from an ATM. Surveillance footage captured her alone during the transaction, showing no visible distress. Afterward, she visited a nearby liquor store where she purchased alcoholic beverages, including Bailey's Irish Cream, vodka, and a box of wine. Once again, security footage confirmed she was alone. Upon returning to her dorm, Maura packed several items: her textbooks, school paperwork, toiletries, clothes, and some food. Her computer and other electronics were left behind. A printout with directions to a location in Vermont was found in the car after her disappearance, and it's believed she may have intended to drive north to either Vermont or New Hampshire. Before leaving, she also sent an email to her boyfriend stating, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking too much of anyone. I promised to call today, though." She added, "I love you, Maura." Her message to faculty mentioned a death in the family, which later proved to be untrue. At around 3:30 p.m., Maura left Amherst driving her black 1996 Saturn sedan. She did not inform anyone of her destination, nor did she leave a note. As she drove north on Interstate 91, there were no confirmed sightings or phone activity that revealed a clear path. However, cell tower pings and witness reports would later help narrow her route. By early evening, Maura was in northern New Hampshire. At approximately 7:27 p.m., her car left the road on Route 112 in Haverhill, a small rural town near the White Mountains. A local resident heard a loud thump outside her home and looked out to see a car against a snowbank. She called the Haverhill Police Department at 7:27 p.m. to report the accident. Meanwhile, another neighbor spoke briefly with Maura at the scene. He observed that she was not visibly injured, but appeared cold and possibly disoriented. She declined his offer to call for help, saying she had already contacted AAA, a claim that was later determined to be false, as cell service was unreliable in the area and no call to AAA had been placed. When police arrived on the scene at 7:46 p.m., just 19 minutes after the initial 911 call, Maura was gone. Her car had suffered front-end damage and the airbags had deployed. The driver's side windshield was cracked, and both the front and rear tires on the driver's side were either flat or soft. The vehicle was locked, and inside, officers found some of Maura's belongings, including her school books, driving directions, a box of wine with spilled contents, and a Coke bottle that appeared to contain alcohol. The road was remote and bordered by woods and a few homes. Snow covered the ground, and the temperature hovered just below freezing. Despite the proximity of several residents and the short response time by police, there were no confirmed sightings of Maura after the crash. Her disappearance from the scene occurred within a narrow time window. adding to the confusion and mystery. Initial responders conducted a brief search of the surrounding area, but found no footprints leading away from the vehicle due to icy conditions. With no immediate evidence of foul play or injury, the case initially appeared to be a standard motor vehicle accident with a missing driver. However, the circumstances would quickly raise serious concerns. Maura Murray had vanished without a trace in a remote area under conditions that would make survival on foot extremely difficult. Her sudden and unexplained departure from Amherst, followed by the disappearance in Haverhill, marked the start of an enduring mystery. The call to the Haverhill Police Department came at 7:27 p.m. on February 9, 2004. A resident on Route 112 reported a car accident in front of her home near the intersection of Wild Ammonoosuc Road in Woodsville, a village in the town of Haverhill, New Hampshire. The witness had seen a dark-colored car off the road and a young woman standing beside it. Within moments, another neighbor, a local bus driver, arrived at the scene after passing the crash during his evening route. The bus driver stopped to offer assistance and spoke briefly with the driver, who he later identified as a young woman fitting Maura Murray's description. She appeared shaken but uninjured. According to him, Maura insisted she had already called for roadside help and did not need police assistance. He noticed her car had sustained front-end damage and appeared inoperable. The airbags had deployed, and the car was lodged against a snowbank, its position suggesting a loss of control on the icy road. At 7:46 p.m., Haverhill police officer Cecil Smith arrived at the scene. Maura Murray was no longer there. Her black Saturn was locked, and no one was seen nearby. A red stain was observed on the driver's side door, initially raising concerns, but it was later determined to be consistent with spilled wine found inside the car. The officer reported finding a rag stuffed into the tailpipe, a detail that would later attract scrutiny, but had no clear explanation. Inside the vehicle, police recovered several items: Maura's wallet containing her ID and credit cards, a book about mountain climbing in the White Mountains, printed directions to Burlington, Vermont, and the bottle of wine that had spilled. The ATM receipt and the liquor store receipt from earlier that day were also found. The Coke bottle that appeared to contain an alcoholic beverage was secured as evidence. Maura's cell phone and debit card were not in the vehicle and have never been located. The area surrounding Route 112 was lightly wooded and rural, with houses spaced sporadically along the road. Despite the presence of snow, there were no clear footprints leading away from the car. Responders performed a cursory search around the immediate area, but did not locate Maura. The darkness, combined with freezing temperatures, complicated the initial efforts. Around 8 p.m., the vehicle was towed from the scene. The initial police report described the incident as a single-car crash with no injuries. It wasn't immediately classified as a missing person case, as it was not yet known that the driver had vanished entirely. Officers speculated that the driver might have left the scene to avoid a DUI citation, assuming she would resurface soon. However, as hours passed with no contact from Maura and no confirmed sightings, concern began to grow. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Her family, unaware of the situation at that moment, would not be informed until the next day. In those critical first hours, the window for locating her nearby was open, but without urgency in the classification of the incident, a broader search was not immediately launched. As the timeline became clearer, so did the narrow gap between her last known interaction and the arrival of police. In under 20 minutes, Maura Murray had vanished from a sparsely populated stretch of highway. No footprints, no witnesses to her departure, and no signals from her phone. Her sudden disappearance in such a brief window would become one of the central mysteries of the case, sparking theories and debates for years to come. The morning of February 10th, 2004, brought the first signs of alarm for Maura Murray's family. Her father, Fred Murray, received a call from UMass reporting that Maura had not shown up for classes. It was not unusual for her to maintain some distance, but this was different. Fred's concern deepened when he learned that Maura's car had been involved in an accident the night before in Haverhill, New Hampshire, a location that held no clear purpose for her being there. Fred quickly mobilized, contacting local authorities and then making the drive north. By the time he arrived, it was evident that Maura had not returned to the vehicle or made contact with anyone. The Haverhill police had filed the case as a missing person, and the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department joined in the early search efforts. Yet, the full-scale search did not begin until the afternoon of February 11th, nearly 2 days after her disappearance. That day, searchers from multiple agencies canvassed the area surrounding the crash site. Police dogs were deployed and reportedly tracked the scent from the vehicle for about 100 yards before losing it abruptly in the middle of the road. This detail led to early speculation that Maura might have entered another vehicle, either accepting help or under duress. The lack of any footprints or trail in the snow supported the theory that she had not wandered far on foot. Law enforcement examined nearby residences and conducted interviews with local residents. No one reported seeing Maura after the accident, nor did anyone hear any unusual activity in the woods. A handful of homes in the vicinity were searched with consent. Despite the cold temperatures and rural surroundings, no evidence was found that suggested she had tried to seek shelter. Meanwhile, Fred Murray and other family members began their own search, walking the roads, distributing flyers, and urging the media to cover the story. They questioned why authorities had not treated the scene as a potential crime site from the start, expressing frustration at the perceived delay and urgency. Fred pushed hard for further searches, a more comprehensive investigation, and eventually for federal involvement. Maura's belongings that remained in the car were released back to the family in the days following the accident. Her phone, debit card, and favorite jewelry were missing and have never been recovered. There were no confirmed sightings of her using any of her accounts after February 9th. Her cell phone was not used again. The trail had gone cold almost instantly. Flyers bearing her photo were posted throughout New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont. News outlets began to report the case, drawing comparisons to other disappearances in remote areas. Online message boards lit up with speculation, and armchair detectives began to piece together their own theories. Some believed Maura had staged her disappearance to escape her life. Others feared she had met with foul play shortly after leaving her car. Despite the expanding theories, investigators had little to work with. No physical evidence pointed to a crime, and there was no conclusive indication that Maura had planned to disappear permanently. The conditions on Route 112 that night, cold, dark, and isolated, offered no comfort to those hoping she had simply walked away. The lack of footprints, combined with the abrupt end to the dog trail, left a chilling impression. Maura Murray had stepped off the map with almost surgical precision. In the weeks following Maura Murray's disappearance, law enforcement efforts intensified. The Haverhill Police worked alongside New Hampshire State Police and the Fish and Game Department. Ground searches were conducted on foot and by air, including the use of helicopters equipped with infrared cameras. Despite the comprehensive efforts, no physical trace of Maura was discovered. No clothing, no personal effects. No sign of her presence beyond the abandoned Saturn. The early phase of the investigation focused heavily on the crash site and its immediate surroundings. Officers re-interviewed local residents and checked outlying areas, including abandoned buildings, wooded trails, and even remote cabins. Thermal imaging flights failed to detect any signs of life in the cold February terrain. The scent trail picked up by search dogs remained a key point, ending in the road and reinforcing the possibility that she entered another vehicle. Mora's family, led by Fred Murray, became deeply involved in the investigation. Fred returned to New Hampshire frequently, distributing flyers, speaking to media outlets, and urging law enforcement to consider broader investigative angles. His persistence became a defining feature of the case. He publicly expressed frustration at the perceived limitations of the official search, advocating for more aggressive tactics and demanding access to case details. In the absence of clear leads, theories about Mora's disappearance multiplied. The idea that she had willingly vanished took hold in some circles, fueled by her apparent secrecy before leaving campus and the false email about a family emergency. Others believed she may have fallen victim to foul play shortly after the crash, possibly abducted while attempting to seek help. The proximity of the crash site to the Appalachian Trail added another layer of complexity, opening up the possibility that she had tried to escape into the wilderness. Online communities, including forums and websites dedicated to missing persons cases, became hotbeds of speculation. Amateur sleuths combed through every known detail, analyzing timelines, behavior patterns, and geographic possibilities. Mora's online presence was limited, leaving few digital traces. Her last cell phone activity occurred shortly before the crash, and there was no evidence of additional communication or planning beyond the lodging inquiries she made days prior. Inquiries were also made into Mora's personal life. Investigators spoke with friends, classmates, and her boyfriend, Billy Rausch. He traveled to New Hampshire to join the search, accompanied by his family and a group of volunteers. While Billy cooperated with authorities, his relationship with Mora came under scrutiny, as did other aspects of her life, including previous disciplinary issues at West Point and an earlier incident involving a stolen credit card. Despite the varied investigative leads, the case produced no conclusive results. No one had seen Mora since the brief encounter with the bus driver. There were no confirmed sightings, no activity on her accounts, and no communications. The Saturn, once considered a potential treasure trove of clues, offered nothing to explain why she had driven into rural New Hampshire or what had happened to her afterward. As the initial momentum of the investigation slowed, frustration grew. Without physical evidence, suspects, or a crime scene, the case entered a challenging phase. Law enforcement faced mounting public pressure while navigating a complex web of uncertainty. Mora's disappearance was no longer just a missing persons case. It was quickly becoming one of the most puzzling unsolved mysteries in the region. In the month that followed Mora Murray's disappearance, a stream of reported sightings, theories, and tips began to surface. Most led nowhere. From the outset, investigators pursued the possibility that Mora had either been picked up by a passing vehicle or had intentionally vanished. Both theories presented major complications, and neither could be confirmed. One early lead involved a report of a young woman matching Mora's description seen at a convenience store in northern New Hampshire the day after the crash. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, but the individual was not conclusively identified as Mora. Additional sightings came in from Vermont and as far as Maine, but none yielded actionable information. Each tip was investigated and dismissed when the subject was ruled out. More formally, law enforcement reviewed Mora's phone and financial records. Her cell phone showed no activity after the early evening of February 9th, and her bank accounts remained untouched. She had not contacted friends or family. No travel bookings, car rentals, or accommodation check-ins were found under her name. These absences fueled the suspicion that if Mora had left voluntarily, she had planned it with exceptional care or received outside assistance. The theory that she had entered another vehicle voluntarily or under coercion became central. The scent trail ending in the middle of the road pointed to the likelihood that she had not wandered into the woods but was instead picked up. This scenario led investigators to review passing traffic. A local resident reported seeing a suspicious vehicle in the area around the time of the crash, but no solid link to Mora could be made. Without a license plate number or definitive description, the lead stalled. Connections to other cases were also considered. One such case was that of Brianna Maitland, a young woman who disappeared in Vermont just over a month later, under somewhat similar circumstances. Despite superficial parallels, young female, rural crash site, vanished without trace. Authorities found no evidence of a link. Nevertheless, the proximity in timing and geography kept both cases in the public eye. Mora's past was further examined for possible clues. Investigators revisited her academic record, disciplinary actions at West Point and UMass, and her personal relationships. Her decision to mislead professors about a family emergency and her sudden departure from campus drew attention. Speculation grew that she may have been escaping pressure, relationship difficulties, or legal consequences. Still, none of these issues offered a motive strong enough to explain the risks of disappearing into remote northern New Hampshire in winter. Theories also turned toward darker possibilities. If Mora had been abducted, it likely happened shortly after the crash, and with little opportunity for resistance. The isolated road, minimal traffic, and brief window of time between the last witness sighting and police arrival supported the idea of a fast-moving event. But without evidence of a struggle or physical trace, nothing could be confirmed. Investigators explored registered sex offenders in the area and reviewed criminal activity within a multi-county radius. Several persons of interest were questioned, but no charges were filed. The lack of evidence linking anyone to the scene, no fingerprints, DNA, or eyewitness accounts, left all theories unproven. Despite the many leads, the case remained frustratingly static. Each new tip, each supposed sighting, and each potential clue led to the same result. No Mora, no resolution. The leads that had once held promise collapsed under scrutiny. Without new evidence or a witness willing to come forward, the case entered a long, stagnant phase marked by speculation and silence. From 2005 onward, the Mora Murray case moved into a prolonged period of uncertainty. Without new evidence or credible sightings, the investigation slowed. Law enforcement maintained that the case remained open and active, but leads became increasingly rare. Fred Murray, Mora's father, refused to let the case fade from public attention. His persistent efforts over the years kept pressure on authorities and the media alike. Fred conducted independent searches, organized volunteers, and continued speaking publicly about his daughter's disappearance. He frequently traveled to Haverhill and the surrounding areas, following up on any tip, no matter how minor. His determination became symbolic of the case itself, an enduring fight for answers in the absence of clear direction. The mid-2000s saw a rise in online communities dedicated to missing persons and true crime. Mora's case gained a dedicated following on internet forums, where users analyzed the timeline, questioned the investigation, and proposed theories. Some contributors focused on inconsistencies in the early police reports. Others examined Mora's personal decisions and behavior before the crash. These communities often operated independently from law enforcement, and while some tips were forwarded to authorities, many discussions remained speculative. During this time, relationships between the Murray family and law enforcement were occasionally strained. Fred Murray publicly criticized what he described as a lack of transparency from the New Hampshire State Police. He submitted formal requests for case documents and eventually filed lawsuits seeking the release of records. Law enforcement maintained that withholding certain documents was necessary to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. In 2006, a fresh wave of attention returned to the case after it was featured in regional and national media outlets. The story resonated widely. An accomplished young woman disappearing without a trace in a remote setting sparked comparisons to other unsolved mysteries. Documentaries and news specials brought renewed public interest, but yielded no new developments. From 2007 to 2010, multiple searches were conducted by both professionals and volunteers. Cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and aerial surveys were employed in different locations based on incoming tips. One area of focus was a private residence near the crash site, which attracted attention after a dog reportedly reacted to a spot in the basement. The home was never formally searched by authorities at the time, citing lack of probable cause. Independent search teams visited the site years later, but nothing conclusive was recovered. Despite the absence of progress, the case remained in the public consciousness. Anniversaries of Maura's disappearance were marked by vigils, media retrospectives, and interviews with family members. A website dedicated to her case served as a central hub for updates, statements, and tips. The message from her family remained consistent. They believed Maura was the victim of foul play, and that someone, somewhere, knew what had happened. By the early 2010s, the case had reached near legend status in online true crime circles. Speculation about Maura's fate ranged from the plausible to the fantastical. Some posited she had suffered a fatal accident in the woods. Others believed she had orchestrated a disappearance to escape pressure. Still, no evidence emerged to support any single theory. Law enforcement reiterated that no one had been ruled out, and no one had been definitively linked to the case. As years passed, public interest ebbed and flowed, but the investigation never officially closed. The silence surrounding Maura Murray's fate endured, becoming its own kind of presence, one that weighed heavily on her family, her hometown, and the small community in northern New Hampshire where she was last seen. The period from 2017 to 2020 brought a renewed wave of interest and investigative activity in the Maura Murray case. Technological advancements, a rise in true crime media, and pressure from public advocacy created new momentum, though the underlying facts of the case remained unchanged. In 2017, the New Hampshire State Police announced that the case was being revisited with modern investigative tools. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed at a residence near the crash site that had been the subject of speculation for years. This location had drawn attention after reports of cadaver dog alerts and irregularities in past private searches. The property, now under new ownership, was examined officially. A ground disturbance and potential anomalies were detected, but no human remains or forensic evidence linked to Maura were found. The same year, Maura's case was featured prominently in a multi-episode documentary series which drew national attention. The series brought together investigators, journalists, and members of the Murray family, aiming to re-examine key aspects of the case. It also provided visibility to lesser-known elements, including inconsistencies in early witness statements and previously unexplored areas of the timeline. Public reaction was significant, with many expressing renewed interest in helping solve the case. Law enforcement, while maintaining caution in disclosing details, acknowledged that the case was active. A new cold case unit within the New Hampshire Attorney General's office began reviewing files. The FBI was involved in limited capacities, offering technical assistance. Still, no charges were filed and no suspects named. Parallel to the official investigation, online communities continue to analyze and discuss the case in detail. New podcasts and YouTube investigations further dissected the timeline, behavior patterns, and forensic possibilities. The accessibility of digital records, satellite imagery, and crowdsourced research contributed to an evolving but inconclusive narrative. Several privately funded search operations were conducted in surrounding woods and along the banks of the Ammonoosuc River. None yielded definitive results. In 2019, the Murray family advocated for a formal declaration of death in order to gain legal access to certain records and advance the possibility of a wrongful death claim. The petition was granted, and Maura was legally declared deceased, an administrative step that did not diminish the family's belief that she may still be found. That same year, a tree near the crash site was marked with a blue ribbon and signage commemorating Maura's disappearance. The roadside memorial became a symbolic focal point for visitors and supporters of the case. On anniversaries, groups gathered there for quiet vigils, reaffirming their commitment to uncovering the truth. By 2020, more than 16 years had passed since Maura was last seen. Law enforcement reaffirmed that the case remained open and active, though few new public updates were given. Despite repeated reviews of the evidence, the case continued to present the same core dilemma. Maura Murray had vanished within a narrow time frame, leaving behind a damaged vehicle, incomplete clues, and no traceable exit path. For her family, each renewed effort brought hope tempered by experience. They continued to seek answers, urging those with information, no matter how minor, to come forward. Public awareness was high, but concrete progress remained elusive. The advancements in technology and forensics held potential. Yet, without a new discovery or witness, the enduring questions remained unanswered. 2 decades have passed since Maura Murray disappeared on a quiet stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Despite sustained public attention, family advocacy, and persistent investigation, the central question remains unresolved. What happened to Maura? By the early 2020s, Maura's case had become one of the most closely followed missing person investigations in the United States. It was frequently cited in discussions about cold cases, law enforcement transparency, and the role of digital communities in modern investigations. Yet, for all the interest and analysis, the case remains defined by its core elements. A university student with no known ties to northern New Hampshire drives hours away from campus, crashes her car, and vanishes before police arrive. The New Hampshire State Police continue to classify the investigation as open. The case remains under periodic review by the Cold Case Unit, and law enforcement has maintained that they have not ruled out any possibilities. Investigators have stated that new information, no matter how small, could prove critical in resolving the case. However, the absence of new physical evidence has left few avenues to pursue. For Maura's family, the years have been marked by grief, determination, and frustration. Her father, Fred Murray, continued to appear at vigils, speak to media, and advocate for broader investigative access. He remains convinced that foul play was involved and believes that someone in the area may hold the key to what happened that night. Her siblings, especially Julie Murray, have taken on more public roles in recent years, leading awareness campaigns and managing communication with supporters and media. The rise of true crime media brought sustained visibility to the case, but it also introduced challenges. Online speculation, while well-intentioned, sometimes veered into baseless accusations and personal intrusions. The Murray family has consistently asked for respectful discussion and discouraged interference with potential witnesses or property owners. Their focus remains on truth and justice, not conspiracy. In 2021, a new search was conducted in the area around the original crash site. It was among the most extensive since the early days of the investigation, utilizing updated technology and resources. Despite the effort, no remains or new evidence were located. Law enforcement reiterated that Maura's disappearance could not yet be classified as either criminal or voluntary with certainty. The case has also prompted broader discussions about how missing person investigations are handled in rural areas. It raised questions about response protocols, classification timelines, and interagency communication. For many, the story of Maura Murray became not only a mystery, but a reflection of the systemic limitations of early-stage investigations where time is a critical factor. Today, Maura's name remains etched in roadside memorials, advocacy events, and ongoing discussions about unresolved disappearances. Her face, once seen in missing person posters, continues to circulate in digital tributes. For those who knew her, Maura is remembered as a gifted student, a dedicated athlete, and a young woman with plans for her future. What happened after she left her car on that cold February night remains unknown, but her story endures, studied, debated, and investigated by many who never knew her, but who refuse to let her case be forgotten. Warren, Massachusetts, a town cradled in the Central Highlands, was where Molly Bish lived with her family. At 16, Molly was in the vibrant cusp between youth and adulthood. She had blonde hair, an athletic build, and a sense of responsibility that made her a trusted figure among her peers and within the local community. During the summer of 2000, Molly secured a job as a lifeguard at Commons Pond, a local swimming area frequented by families and children in the area. The job came with a mix of duty and freedom. Molly was known to take her responsibilities seriously. Each morning, she would be dropped off by her mother, Maggie, who made sure her daughter arrived safely. The lifeguard station at Commons Pond was modest, a shed near the shore, providing a panoramic view of the water. It was a summer job, but for Molly, it was more than that. It was a trusted role in the community and a step toward adulthood. The Bish family lived a quiet life. John Bish, Molly's father, was a grief counselor, while Maggie, her mother, was active in the community and deeply involved in her children's lives. Molly's older brother, John Jr., was protective of his sister and remembered her as compassionate and determined. She played sports, was popular in school, and showed a strong sense of empathy, traits that made her disappearance all the more shattering to those who knew her. The summer of 2000 was supposed to be a time of promise for Molly. Her family had recently returned from vacation, and she was eager to return to work at the pond. Warren was a town where children walked freely, and neighbors greeted one another by name. Crimes were rare. The Bishs had little reason to be fearful, even as Magi grew slightly uneasy following an encounter that would later gain significance. On June 26, 2000, the day before Molly Bish vanished, Magi Bish drove her daughter to her lifeguard shift at Commons Pond, as usual. The morning sun filtered through the trees lining the road to the pond, casting a quiet, idyllic atmosphere over the landscape. As they approached the parking area, Maggie noticed something unusual. a man sitting alone in a white car. The vehicle was positioned near the lifeguard station, and the man inside seemed out of place. He was described as a white male with a stocky build, graying hair, and a mustache. What caught Magi's attention wasn't just his appearance, but his presence. He lingered, watching, not engaging in any clear activity like preparing to swim or walk. Maggie's instincts flared. She felt uneasy but didn't voice her concerns to Molly at that moment. Her daughter seemed unconcerned and went about her preparations for the day. Maggie couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. The man in the white sedan didn't resemble anyone she recognized from the neighborhood or the usual visitors to Comins Pond. Still, she drove off, telling herself it was probably nothing. She kept thinking about it throughout the day, enough that she mentioned the man to her husband later that evening. It was a detail that would take on haunting significance in the days and years to follow. The next morning, she would return to Comins Pond with Molly, following the same route, parking in the same spot. But this time, everything would be different. June 27, 2000 began like any other summer day. Maggie Bish drove Molly to Comins Pond for her lifeguard shift, just as she had the day before. This time, the white car and its mysterious occupant were gone. Molly, dressed in her lifeguard uniform, grabbed her bag, blew her mother a kiss, and walked toward the lifeguard station. It was the last time Maggie saw her daughter. Later that morning, around 10 a.m., local residents began arriving at Comins Pond. They noticed something strange. The lifeguard chair was empty. Molly's backpack, water bottle, and sandals were there, but she was not. The unattended station was out of character. Molly had been responsible and punctual, never known to abandon her post without explanation. Police were notified quickly. Initial searches of the area around the pond began almost immediately. The surroundings were combed for any sign of Molly. Her belongings were collected as evidence, and law enforcement began interviewing potential witnesses. No one had seen or heard anything unusual that morning. There were no immediate signs of a struggle or foul play at the lifeguard station. The disappearance stunned the town. Volunteers joined law enforcement in searching the woods, trails, and bodies of water surrounding Comins Pond. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Dogs were brought in to track scents. The efforts continued for days, then weeks, but no substantial clues emerged. Molly had vanished in daylight from a public place, leaving behind nothing but the items she brought to work. In the initial days of the investigation, authorities treated the case as a missing person rather than an abduction, though concern was evident from the outset. There was no indication that Molly had run away. She had made plans, was close to her family, and had shown no signs of distress. What remained was an agonizing void. A girl gone without a trace, a family grasping for answers, and a small town engulfed in uncertainty. In the immediate aftermath of Molly Bish's disappearance, the town of Warren mobilized with uncommon urgency. The search effort was one of the most extensive in Massachusetts history at the time. Hundreds of volunteers gathered daily, joined by local and state police, search and rescue teams, divers, and helicopters. The woods around Comins Pond, nearby water bodies, and rural trails were all combed with precision. Despite the scale of the effort, the search yielded few results. Law enforcement canvassed the area door to door, questioned locals, and followed up on any possible sightings or tips. Flyers bearing Molly's photo and description were distributed throughout the region. Roadside signs and community message boards carried her name. Television and radio broadcasts brought national attention, prompting tips from across the country. Search teams covered terrain that extended well beyond Comins Pond. Swamps were drained, Cadaver dogs were deployed repeatedly. Despite the vast resources and community determination, there were no solid leads. Witnesses near the pond offered few useful details. Some remembered seeing a white sedan in the area in the days leading up to Molly's disappearance, but no one saw what had happened that morning. The Bish family remained at the center of it all. Meiji and John became tireless advocates for their daughter. They held press conferences, worked with missing children organizations, and maintained a visible public presence. Molly's brother, John Jr., also took part in searches and media appeals, hoping to keep attention on the case. The family's grief was paired with an unrelenting drive to find answers. Law enforcement established a dedicated task force. Investigators pursued several early leads, including possible connections to known sex offenders and individuals with criminal backgrounds in the area. Yet each potential suspect was eventually cleared or lacked sufficient evidence to tie them to the case. Weeks turned into months. Despite the intense and ongoing investigation, Molly's whereabouts remained unknown. Hope flickered but never disappeared entirely, sustained by the Bish family's resilience and the community's commitment to bringing Molly home. As the weeks after Molly's disappearance became months, the intensity of the initial search gave way to a slower, more grueling wait. The daily presence of search parties diminished, but the Bish family's resolve did not. Maggie and John continued to speak to the media, organizing events and awareness campaigns to keep Molly's case from fading from public consciousness. Missing posters remained on telephone poles, bulletin boards, and storefront windows throughout Warren and beyond. Molly's photo became a familiar image. Her youthful face, blonde hair, and calm expression symbolized a mystery that had touched a nerve across New England. Vigils were held regularly, gathering neighbors, friends, and strangers in silent prayer and shared sorrow. The Bish family turned their personal tragedy into advocacy. They worked to strengthen child protection laws and support other families of missing children. Their efforts contributed to the development of improved alert systems and increased public awareness about child abductions. Though their grief was ever present, they channeled it into action, refusing to let Molly's name be forgotten. Leads continued to surface sporadically, though many proved fruitless. Some tips led investigators to remote areas to search for evidence. Others involved questioning individuals with criminal records or those who had been in the area at the time of the disappearance. All were pursued with diligence, but no definitive breakthroughs came. During this period, law enforcement kept the investigation open and active. New detectives were assigned as older ones moved on. Files expanded, containing thousands of pages of interviews, reports, and maps. The search for the white sedan and its driver remained a recurring theme, but without a license plate number or confirmed identity, it led to countless dead ends. 3 years passed. Every family event, birthday, and holiday was marked by Molly's absence. The waiting took its toll, but the Bish family never stopped hoping that answers would come, and that justice would follow. Then, in June 2003, a discovery would finally shift the course of the investigation. On June 9, 2003, nearly 3 years after Molly Bish disappeared, a tip led a local man to explore the dense woods of Whiskey Hill in Palmer, Massachusetts. The area was remote, about 5 miles from Coleman's Pond, and characterized by thick vegetation and uneven terrain. As the man moved through the woods, he stumbled upon something disturbing, a piece of blue fabric resembling a bathing suit, partially buried under leaves and brush. Authorities were immediately alerted. A large team of investigators, crime scene personnel, and forensic experts descended on the site. Over the next several days, they uncovered human remains scattered across the area. The skeletal condition of the bones and the environment made recovery delicate and slow. The blue bathing suit found nearby matched the one Molly had been wearing on the day of her disappearance. Dental records were used to confirm the identity. The remains were those of Molly Bish. The location of the discovery raised questions. The wooded site was off a secluded path, not far from a logging road. It was an area known to hunters and locals, but not commonly frequented by visitors. The presence of personal items and the condition of the remains suggested that Molly had been there for a long time, likely since the day she vanished. Law enforcement sealed off the area to preserve potential evidence. Items found at the scene were cataloged, including parts of clothing and what appeared to be personal effects. Despite hopes that the site would yield crucial forensic evidence, the natural degradation over 3 years limited what could be conclusively determined. Still, the discovery marked a turning point. The Bish family, while devastated by the confirmation of Molly's death, gained a measure of closure. The mystery of where she had gone was finally resolved, even as the question of who was responsible remained unanswered. Public interest surged again. Media outlets revisited the case, and new tips began to emerge. With the recovery of her remains, investigators hoped to generate fresh leads and re-examine earlier suspects in light of the new location and timeline. Though the case was no longer a missing persons investigation, the search for Molly's killer had just entered a new phase. The discovery of Molly Bish's remains in 2003 breathed new life into the investigation. With the confirmation of homicide, attention turned once again to persons of interest, individuals who had appeared in the investigation previously, as well as new names uncovered through additional tips and forensic analysis. Among the first to draw renewed scrutiny was Rodney Stanger, a man who had lived in Southbridge, Massachusetts, not far from where Molly disappeared. He had moved to Florida shortly after Molly vanished. Years later, after he was arrested in Florida for the murder of his longtime girlfriend, investigators noted striking similarities between his appearance and the composite sketch of the man in the white sedan seen by Magi Bish the day before Molly disappeared. Stanger had knowledge of the area around Coleman's Pond and a background that included violence and firearms. A photo of him with a white car emerged, and his resemblance to the sketch prompted investigators to travel to Florida to interview him. Despite extensive questioning and evidence collection, authorities were unable to definitively link him to Molly's death. He remained a person of interest, but was never charged. Another figure to attract attention was Gerald Battistoni, a registered sex offender who had served time for multiple assaults involving minors. His criminal history and his presence in the region during the summer of 2000 made him a subject of intense investigation. In 2011, Battistoni attempted suicide after being publicly identified as a person of interest in the Bish case. He later died in prison in 2014. The investigation also focused on Francis Sumner Sr., a convicted rapist with a long criminal history. In 2021, Sumner was named publicly by law enforcement as a person of interest. He had lived in central Massachusetts and had ties to the area around Warren and Palmer. Although Sumner had died in 2016, his background and proximity to key locations led authorities to explore any possible connection he might have had to Molly's abduction and murder. Each lead brought moments of hope and renewed public attention. Investigators combed through old case files, conducted new interviews, and applied forensic testing where possible. Yet, none of the individuals examined could be definitively linked to the crime scene through DNA or other physical evidence. Despite the absence of charges, the investigation remained active. Law enforcement continued to work with Molly's family, pursue emerging leads, and apply new forensic tools. The names of those considered over the years painted a picture of possible opportunity, means, and motive, but never enough to solve the case. As investigators probe deeper into the Molly Bish case, comparisons emerge with an earlier unsolved crime in the same region, the 1993 abduction and murder of 10-year-old Holly Pyrainen. Holly had disappeared while visiting her grandparents in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, only about 15 miles from Warren. Her body was later found in a wooded area of Brimfield, not far from where Molly's remains would be discovered a decade later. The similarities between the two cases were striking. Both victims were young girls taken during daylight hours. Both abductions occurred in rural areas of central Massachusetts, and in each case, the remains were found in wooded locations within a close geographic range. Each case had generated widespread media coverage and involved extensive search efforts that captured public attention. From early on, Molly's family and the Pyrainen family were in contact. The Bishes had even publicly supported efforts to find Holly's killer before Molly disappeared. After Molly's death, the connection between the two cases became a focal point for law enforcement. Shared timelines, geographic proximity, and potential overlap in suspects prompted investigators to look for links between the two crimes. The possibility of a serial offender who had operated in the region fueled further investigation. Law enforcement compared evidence from both crime scenes, looking for DNA or forensic material that might connect them. In both cases, however, the condition of the remains and the time elapsed limited what could be retrieved or matched. Despite the challenges, efforts to explore a connection between Holly and Molly's cases continued for years. Investigators reviewed lists of known offenders active in the area in both 1993 and 2000. Some individuals surfaced as possible links, though none were charged in either case. For the families involved, the parallels were deeply personal and painful. The Bish and Pyrainen families shared the burden of loss and the public search for justice. Their experiences underscored the need for improved investigative coordination and data sharing across unsolved cases. To this day, law enforcement has not ruled out a connection between the two murders. Though definitive evidence linking them remains elusive, the shared characteristics ensure that each investigation continues to inform the other, sustaining hope that answers may one day emerge for both girls. With the passage of time, technological advancements in forensic science became a critical asset in the Molly Bish investigation. While initial efforts to analyze evidence from the scene had been hampered by environmental degradation and limited DNA retrieval techniques in the early 2000s, the emergence of new tools provided a renewed sense of possibility. Forensic scientists revisited material recovered from the site where Molly's remains had been found. While the skeletal remains and items like her bathing suit offered little at the time of discovery, investigators preserved these artifacts in the hope that future methods might yield results. In later years, improvements in trace DNA analysis, touch DNA, and mitochondrial testing opened new avenues. Law enforcement agencies collaborated with national laboratories to retest physical evidence using these upgraded technologies. Even minute biological traces could now be amplified and compared against national DNA databases. Investigators also explored familial DNA techniques, a method that could identify potential relatives of a suspect if the individual's DNA wasn't directly available in law enforcement databases. Parallel to lab work, digital forensics grew in relevance. Investigators reanalyzed phone records, background checks, and criminal databases with more sophisticated software, mapping connections and timelines with greater accuracy. Geographic profiling tools were also employed to better understand movement patterns that might link persons of interest to key locations like Coleman's Pond and Whiskey Hill. Despite the sophistication of the methods, the investigation continued to face obstacles. The natural decomposition of remains and the exposure of items to the elements over 3 years limited what could be conclusively determined. Biological samples degraded by moisture, insects, and temperature variation often failed to yield viable results. Yet, forensic efforts were not without value. They helped narrow down the list of viable suspects, rule out individuals previously under suspicion, and confirm timelines that had only been based on witness testimony. In some cases, new forensic tests prompted law enforcement to re-interview witnesses or re-examine case files with fresh eyes. While a definitive forensic breakthrough had yet to materialize, the integration of advanced scientific tools kept the investigation alive. For the Bish family, it represented the enduring promise that one day, the smallest fragment of evidence could finally provide the truth they had sought for so long. Years after Molly Bish's disappearance and the eventual discovery of her remains, the pursuit of justice continues. Though no one has been charged in connection with her death, the investigation remains active, driven by a committed team of detectives and the unyielding determination of her family. Public interest in the case has endured. Every anniversary of Molly's disappearance and the discovery of her remains brings renewed attention, new coverage, and often new tips. Law enforcement regularly reviews the case, using updated tools to assess old evidence and explore untested theories. While challenges persist, each step forward represents hope. The Bish family has remained central to keeping Molly's story alive. Magi and John have spoken at schools, safety summits, and government panels, advocating for missing children and promoting policy changes. Their advocacy contributed to the implementation of child safety initiatives, including legislation related to public alert systems and offender monitoring. Their efforts extended beyond policy. The family established a foundation in Molly's name, aimed at improving public safety and supporting families of missing persons. Through their outreach, they have provided comfort to others facing similar grief while continuing to press for resolution in their own case. Law enforcement has maintained the case as an open homicide. Advances in technology and investigative techniques are periodically applied to evidence in the hope of uncovering a lead. From revisiting persons of interest to pursuing genetic genealogy, authorities remain open to any avenue that might reveal the identity of Molly's killer. Despite the long years since June 2000, the community's memory of Molly has not dimmed. Memorials and events continue to honor her life and the efforts to bring her justice. Her story remains a reminder of the importance of vigilance, community involvement, and persistence. The Molly Bish case stands as one of Massachusetts's most haunting unsolved crimes. It is a case shaped by tragedy, sustained by resilience, and defined by the refusal to give up. For the Bish family and the investigators still working the case, the goal remains unchanged: to find the person responsible and to ensure that Molly's voice is heard until justice is finally served. On August 26, 1995, the sweltering Kentucky heat drove many residents to the banks of the Ohio River for relief. Among them was 23-year-old Heather Teague. A college student with a bright future, Heather had chosen to spend the day sunbathing alone on Newburgh Beach in Henderson County. Her burgundy bikini glinted under the late summer sun as she laid on a towel in a secluded area near a grassy ridge. Across the river in Indiana, a man named Tim Walthall adjusted the scope of his telescope from his house. He often used it for bird watching or viewing the opposite shore. That afternoon, as he looked through the lens, he spotted something alarming. A man emerging from the woods behind Heather, approaching stealthily. The figure, clad in camouflage, suddenly grabbed Heather by the hair and dragged her into the forest. Shocked, Walthall immediately called 911 to report the incident, describing what he had seen through the scope in vivid detail. Local law enforcement responded quickly. Deputies arrived at the beach within minutes, finding only Heather's towel, her car, and a few personal items. There was no sign of Heather or the assailant. The area behind the beach was dense with trees and underbrush, complicating search efforts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, it became clear that this was no misunderstanding or accidental separation. Heather Teague had vanished. The following hours were chaotic. Police began a grid search, volunteers gathered, and a perimeter was set. Boats were launched into the Ohio River. Helicopters flew overhead. As night fell, the beach transformed from a place of recreation to a scene of growing dread. Investigators attempted to reconstruct the sequence of events from Walthall's testimony and the physical evidence left behind. In the early stages, authorities focused on combing the nearby woods and riverbanks. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and dive teams searched beneath the water's surface. Yet, no further trace of Heather emerged that day or the next. The community of Henderson County, stunned by the suddenness and brutality of the abduction, began circulating Heather's photo and details, hoping someone else had seen something. The only solid lead remained the account from Walthall, who continued to cooperate with investigators. His telescope became a piece of evidence. Still, with no other witnesses and no immediate suspects, the case remained open-ended. Rumors began to circulate in the small community, and pressure mounted on law enforcement to find the man responsible. Thus ended the first day of the search for Heather Teague. A quiet afternoon turned nightmarish in an instant, setting in motion a decades-long investigation into one of Kentucky's most haunting missing persons cases. The morning after Heather Teague's disappearance, Henderson County awoke to front-page headlines and an intensifying search. The investigation shifted into high gear. Officers combed the beach where Heather had been last seen. Her maroon Ford Mustang, parked nearby, became a focal point. Inside, they found her purse, clothing, and other personal items, clear signs that she had not left voluntarily. Tim Walthall, the telescope witness, was interviewed repeatedly. His account was consistent. A man in camouflage had grabbed Heather and dragged her into the nearby woods. His distance from the scene limited any chance of identifying the abductor's face, but the clothing, behavior, and suddenness of the act provided a troubling narrative. Investigators took Walthall's telescope into evidence, verifying the view from his property across the river. Local authorities set up a command center near the site. Helicopters conducted aerial searches while boats patrolled the Ohio River, scrutinizing the shoreline and dragging the waters. Dive teams probed murky depths, but found nothing definitive. Search dogs were brought to the scene and led handlers into the thick forest, but no trail led to Heather. As the hours stretched into days, community members joined law enforcement in canvassing the area. Flyers were posted in gas stations, grocery stores, and public buildings. The media descended on the case, broadcasting Heather's image and the details of her abduction. For the Teague family, every moment without answers deepened the anguish. Investigators also appealed to local businesses and residents near the beach for any security footage, though in 1995, such technology was not widely used. No new eyewitnesses came forward. The thick brush behind the beach yielded no additional evidence. No signs of struggle, no discarded items, no clothing. It was as if Heather had vanished without a trace beyond the few items she left on the sand. Law enforcement began constructing a profile of the possible abductor. The man was believed to be familiar with the area, able to approach unseen and disappear quickly. The camouflage suggested premeditation. Still, without forensic evidence or a witness who could identify the suspect, they faced mounting challenges. The case began attracting attention beyond Henderson County. State and federal agencies offered support. Tip lines were established, and hundreds of leads began pouring in. Each was followed, but none produced a break in the case. The lack of physical evidence at the scene and the swiftness of the abduction left investigators with more questions than answers. For Heather's family, each day without resolution brought new frustrations. Her mother, Sarah Teague, remained visible in the media, urging the public to stay engaged. She pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. The initial shock of Heather's disappearance began to transform into a relentless search for the truth. The investigation continued without rest, and law enforcement began to consider persons of interest. One name, in particular, began to surface. A man who had been stopped shortly after the abduction and who fit several aspects of the description. This lead would soon shift the course of the case. In the early days of the investigation, authorities received a tip that would change the trajectory of the case. A man named Marvin "Marty" Dill, a resident of Henderson County, had recently been stopped by police under suspicious circumstances. The details of the traffic stop raised immediate red flags. On the night of Heather Teague's disappearance, Dill had been pulled over near the river. Inside his vehicle, police reportedly found rope, duct tape, 2 guns, and a pair of binoculars. The car was a red Ford Bronco, a model that witnesses later claimed to have seen near the beach. Though Dill was not arrested at that time, the contents of his car, his proximity to the scene, and his apparent nervousness made him an early person of interest. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Dill lived only a few miles from the abduction site. His wife was brought in for questioning. During grand jury proceedings, she allegedly refused to testify against him, invoking spousal privilege. Nonetheless, rumors circulated that she had made statements implicating Dill in the abduction. These claims never resulted in formal charges, but they fueled further scrutiny. Authorities planned to bring Dill in for further questioning. However, before they could act, the case took a tragic and complicated turn. Just as investigators prepared to execute a search warrant on his property, Marty Dill died by suicide. He shot himself as law enforcement officers arrived at his residence. Dill's death sent shockwaves through the investigation. Many believed it was an implicit admission of guilt. His apparent avoidance of questioning, the contents of his car, and his decision to end his life all seemed to point to involvement in Heather Teague's disappearance. Law enforcement conducted a search of Dill's property, hoping to find physical evidence linking him to the case. Despite exhaustive efforts, no conclusive proof emerged. There was no sign of Heather, no remains, and no clear forensic link to the crime scene. Without a confession, witnesses, or DNA evidence, the case stalled again. Dill remained the leading suspect in the eyes of many investigators and members of the community. But with his death, the opportunity for direct questioning or prosecution was gone. The grand jury ultimately declined to indict him posthumously due to the lack of physical evidence. The public response to Dill's death was mixed. Some saw it as a tragic end to a troubled man's life. Others as the closing of a door on justice for Heather Teague. Her family expressed deep frustration, feeling that crucial information had died with him. Heather's mother, Sarah, remained vocal, pressing for more transparency about Dill's connection to the case and demanding access to the investigative files that law enforcement had kept sealed. In the months that followed, the case lost momentum. Though Dill's name stayed at the center of the narrative, investigators quietly began to consider other possibilities. The lack of closure haunted the community, and the Teague family continued their pursuit of the truth. The focus on Dill, while significant, left many unanswered questions. Why was there no physical trace of Heather on his property or in his vehicle? Was his suicide motivated by guilt, fear, or something else entirely? And most importantly, was he truly the person responsible, or merely a man with something else to hide? As the investigation into Heather Teague's disappearance continued beyond its initial stages, not all law enforcement officials and observers were convinced that Marty Dill's suicide marked the end of the story. While Dill remained the primary suspect in official files, alternative theories began to surface, some rooted in emerging evidence, others in the absence of a clear resolution. One name that began to draw attention was Christopher Below. Below had a criminal record that included violent offenses and a known presence in the region. Investigators took note of his history and behavioral patterns. At the time of Heather's disappearance, Below was reportedly moving between states, often using aliases. He was eventually convicted in connection with another woman's disappearance, which bore some unsettling similarities to the Teague case. Below's potential connection was not officially confirmed, but investigators noted overlapping timelines and geography. He had ties to the area around Henderson County and was known to target women. In one case, he had approached a woman at a gas station in a red vehicle, a detail that echoed the red Bronco sighting near the beach. Despite these parallels, no direct evidence linked him to Heather's abduction. Other theories pointed toward broader issues within the investigation itself. Questions were raised about whether multiple individuals might have been involved, or if the crime was the result of an opportunistic act. The lack of physical evidence continued to hinder any attempt to move forward definitively with alternative suspects. Some residents of Henderson County speculated about a possible cover-up or mishandling of evidence. Over time, these speculations gave rise to rumors that certain leads were either ignored or not thoroughly pursued. Law enforcement denied such claims, but frustration grew as the years passed without progress. Meanwhile, Heather's mother, Sarah Teague, began examining other possibilities herself. She reviewed records, studied other cases, and engaged with private investigators. Her focus expanded beyond Marty Dill, seeking answers wherever they might lead. She scrutinized inconsistencies in the official narrative and pushed for broader consideration of individuals like Below. Another point of contention was the lack of surveillance or witnesses beyond Tim Walthall. Despite the beach's relative seclusion, many wondered whether others had been nearby that day and failed to come forward. In a community where everyone knew each other, the silence was seen by some as suspicious. While Dill remained the primary focus for many, the persistence of other suspects like Below complicated the case's legacy. No one had been charged, no trial had been held, and Heather's whereabouts remained unknown. Each new theory reflected the desperation to fill the void left by unanswered questions. The investigation's evolution into multiple directions underscored the difficulties faced by law enforcement. With no definitive evidence tying any individual to the crime, the case hovered in uncertainty. And for those closest to Heather, every new theory was another painful reminder that justice had not been served. In the wake of her daughter's disappearance, Sarah Teague became the most vocal and persistent advocate for truth. Unwilling to accept silence or half answers, she embarked on a campaign that would span decades, characterized by public advocacy, legal petitions, and direct confrontations with the institutions she believed had failed her daughter. Sarah began by demanding access to investigative records. She submitted Freedom of Information Act requests, appealed to state agencies, and contacted lawmakers seeking transparency from local and federal law enforcement. Repeatedly, her requests were denied or heavily redacted. Frustrated, she turned to the courts, initiating legal action against agencies she accused of withholding critical information. One of the central issues she pursued involved discrepancies in the 911 call logs and recordings from the day Heather disappeared. Sarah claimed that portions of the 911 tape were missing or edited. She also questioned the timeline presented by authorities, particularly in relation to how quickly law enforcement responded to Tim Walthall's call. These inconsistencies, in her view, pointed to procedural failures or possible suppression of information. Sarah also pursued the alleged link between Marty Dill and other local individuals. She argued that Dill may not have acted alone and raised questions about the thoroughness of the search conducted on his property. She asked why more advanced forensic tools weren't used and why certain items, potentially significant, were never tested or disclosed. When authorities dismissed these claims, she responded by assembling her own evidence, interviewing witnesses, and tracking down former investigators. In the years that followed, Sarah turned to the media to amplify her efforts. She appeared in interviews, participated in the television programs focusing on unsolved cases, and collaborated with independent journalists. Through these platforms, she recounted Heather's story, drawing attention to unanswered questions and urging the public to remain engaged. She also organized vigils, memorials, and awareness campaigns, ensuring Heather's name was not forgotten. Her persistence earned both admiration and criticism. Some in the community saw her as a symbol of resilience. Others grew weary of the prolonged scrutiny, but Sarah remained undeterred. One particularly contentious moment came when she sought the release of state police investigative files. Her lawsuit argued that the public interest in solving Heather's case outweighed the reasons for keeping the records sealed. The courts, however, upheld law enforcement's right to withhold certain documents, citing an ongoing investigation. Sarah's battle extended into state politics as well. She corresponded with governors and legislators, lobbying for reforms in how missing persons cases are handled and how families are treated. Her efforts helped shine a light on systemic issues faced by relatives of missing individuals, especially in long-term, unresolved cases. Though she faced legal setbacks, Sarah's determination forced the case to remain in public consciousness. Her advocacy contributed to renewed interest from private investigators and law enforcement officials willing to revisit the evidence. Despite the emotional toll, she refused to stop. For Sarah, every unanswered question was a barrier to justice, one she would continue to confront until the full truth about her daughter's disappearance came to light. Decades after Heather Teague vanished from Newburgh Beach, her case remains officially unsolved, yet the drive to uncover what happened has not diminished. Recent years have brought renewed activity, including legal action, forensic reanalysis, and continued public attention, as those closest to the case refuse to let it be forgotten. One of the key developments came in the form of renewed forensic testing. Advances in DNA analysis opened the door for re-examining items collected during the original investigation. Though much of the early physical evidence yielded little in the way of usable DNA due to degradation or contamination, law enforcement revisited some artifacts in the hope of finding new leads. The results have not been disclosed publicly in detail, but the reinvigoration of testing signaled that the case had not been closed behind the scenes. Sarah Teague continued pressing for access to files she believed held vital clues. Even years after her initial lawsuits, she filed new motions and challenged state agencies, demanding transparency. Some of these actions aimed to unseal police records, including case notes, interviews, and reports on potential suspects. Courts acknowledged the ongoing investigation, but did not release the full breadth of documents Sarah sought. At the same time, interest in the case was amplified through national and regional media coverage. Investigative podcasts, online documentaries, and television series featured Heather's story, bringing a new audience into contact with the facts. These efforts sparked tips and theories from the public, which were submitted to law enforcement for evaluation. While most did not result in breakthroughs, a handful were reportedly pursued, keeping the investigation in motion. Law enforcement has maintained that the case remains open. While officials have reiterated that Marvin "Marty" Dill was a significant person of interest, they have stopped short of declaring the case closed in his name. Their statements have left room for alternative scenarios, although no new arrests have been made. Some investigative activity has involved revisiting the timeline and reassessing the role of potential secondary witnesses. Despite the lack of a clear trail, investigators reviewed older testimony and reconsidered the credibility of certain leads that had previously been set aside. This effort was part of a broader strategy to rule out inconsistencies and explore unexamined details. In 2020 and beyond, Heather's case gained traction among digital communities focused on cold cases. These online researchers compiled timelines, analyzed official statements, and scrutinized maps and public records. While unofficial, these efforts mirrored Sarah Teague's persistent quest for the truth and occasionally yielded information later acknowledged by authorities. To this day, the physical evidence has not led to a body, and no conclusive connection to any one suspect has been proven beyond doubt. Heather's fate remains uncertain, her last known moments frozen in time through the view of a telescope and the fragments left behind on the sand. The enduring mystery of Heather Teague's disappearance has become more than a case. It is a symbol of perseverance and the lengths to which a mother, a community, and a justice system must go in the pursuit of answers. As new technology continues to develop and public attention keeps the case alive, the hope remains that one day, definitive truth will emerge from the silence. Kathleen McCormack was born on June 15, 1952, in New Hyde Park, Long Island. The youngest of 5 children, she grew up in a working-class Roman Catholic household. Her father was a telephone company employee, and her mother passed away when Kathleen was still a teenager, an event that shaped much of her early life. Those close to her described Kathleen as ambitious, kind-hearted, and intelligent. Her early years were marked by academic success and a drive to achieve more than what her modest beginnings seemed to offer. In 1971, Kathleen met Robert Durst while she was working as a dental hygienist. Durst, the eldest son of New York real estate magnate Seymour Durst, was 9 years older and came from a world very different from hers. Educated at Scarsdale High School and later Lehigh University, Robert Durst had a reserved demeanor and often kept to himself. Despite the differences in background, the two quickly grew close. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and they moved in together within weeks. By 1973, Kathleen had enrolled at Western Connecticut State College with the intention of becoming a nurse. Around the same time, she and Robert Durst married in a quiet ceremony. The union marked a turning point in her life. She later transferred to the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx with aspirations to become a pediatrician. Friends and colleagues noted her dedication and determination, balancing a rigorous medical school curriculum with the complexities of her marriage to Durst. The Durst family was one of New York's most prominent real estate dynasties, with holdings throughout Manhattan. Robert, though the presumed heir, was often at odds with his family's business approach. He ran a health food store in Vermont for a time, distancing himself from the corporate world. Kathleen, meanwhile, sought her own path, focused on her studies, and cultivating a circle of supportive friends. During these early years, there were indications that all was not well behind the scenes. Kathleen occasionally confided in close friends about strains in the marriage. These included arguments, controlling behavior, and signs of emotional distress. Some friends urged her to be cautious. Nevertheless, to the outside world, they appeared to be an ambitious young couple, balancing privilege and personal goals. As the 1970s came to a close, Kathleen was nearing the end of her medical education. She was just months away from graduation, preparing to enter the next chapter of her life as a doctor. Yet, tensions in the marriage had escalated. Friends observed bruises and changes in her demeanor. Reports from those close to her suggested increasing volatility in her relationship with Durst. Still, Kathleen seemed committed to finishing her studies and moving forward. The McCormick-Durst marriage was at a crossroads. Kathleen had ambitions for independence and professional achievement. Robert's behavior had become more erratic, according to later testimonies. The early optimism of their relationship had eroded, leaving behind an atmosphere of unease. This period set the stage for the events that would soon follow, an unexplained disappearance that would remain unresolved for decades. As Kathleen McCormack moved through the demanding years of medical school, her life became increasingly divided between academic determination and the escalating strain within her marriage. By the late 1970s, she had begun the final stretch toward her medical degree at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Peers described her as diligent and compassionate, traits that made her a favorite among classmates and instructors alike. Yet behind her focused exterior, there were signs of personal turmoil. The Durst marriage had deteriorated into a complex and troubled relationship. Kathleen confided in friends and colleagues about growing concerns. She spoke of emotional abuse and, at times, physical confrontations. In one instance, she reportedly showed up at a friend's house late at night, visibly upset, seeking a place to stay after a serious argument. Friends later recalled her expressing fears about her safety, yet she also showed reluctance to walk away from the marriage before completing her degree. The couple's financial situation, in contrast, remained stable. With Robert Durst's family wealth in the background, they lived in South Salem, New York, in a lakefront cottage. The property was isolated and picturesque, but it also allowed for privacy that may have concealed the tensions within. Despite the dysfunction, there were periods of calm when Kathleen focused on her studies and maintained an active social network. Her friends supported her efforts to balance school and marriage, but concern for her well-being grew steadily. Robert Durst's personality, as described by those who knew him, was reclusive and often unpredictable. He could be charming, yet coldly distant. Kathleen sometimes mentioned his controlling behavior. She said he monitored her movements and resented her growing independence. She was seen by some as trying to assert herself while managing his temper and emotional detachment. Her family, though aware of problems, seemed to be on the periphery of her domestic life, rarely intervening directly. By late 1981, Kathleen's desire for autonomy became more apparent. She reportedly began exploring the possibility of divorce and asked friends for advice. One friend later described a phone call in which Kathleen asked about dividing assets and expressed anxiety about how Durst might react. She also made efforts to create a separate identity. applying for residency positions, and looking for apartments in Manhattan. These actions suggested she was preparing for life apart from her husband. Meanwhile, Durst's behavior continued to raise red flags among those close to the couple. He reportedly resented her academic commitments and questioned her loyalty. Friends recalled incidents that suggested deepening emotional instability. Tensions at home were matched by increasing isolation for Kathleen, who began spending more time with trusted friends in New York City. She often stayed overnight in Manhattan during the week to be closer to her school and reduce time spent in South Salem. Despite the turbulence, Kathleen maintained a strong presence in her academic setting. In January 1982, she was just months from graduating. She had secured interviews for residency programs and remained focused on completing her final requirements. Her life outside the marriage seemed to be taking shape, with clear plans for a future that did not necessarily include Robert Durst. However, the final weeks before her disappearance were marked by a crescendo of stress. Reports suggest she had begun formally taking steps towards separation. There were indications she had consulted an attorney and was planning to take legal action. Friends believed she was closer than ever to ending the marriage. Yet, she remained cautious, aware that a misstep could trigger an unpredictable reaction from her husband. As January drew to a close, the pressure was mounting. Kathleen's final known actions included speaking with friends, attending school functions, and voicing concern about her relationship. Those around her described a woman trying to take control of her life, standing at the edge of significant change. What no one could have predicted was that the final weekend of January 1982 would be the last time she would be seen alive. The final weekend of January 1982 began like many others for Kathleen McCormick Durst, filled with the usual obligations of a busy medical student nearing graduation. On Friday, January 29th, she attended a party hosted by a friend in New York City. She appeared upbeat, sharing that she was looking forward to finishing school and applying for residency programs. Those who saw her noted nothing out of the ordinary. She seemed determined and focused. By Sunday, January 31st, the situation took a dark and irreversible turn. According to later accounts, Kathleen had dinner with friends in Manhattan that evening. She left earlier than expected, reportedly at the request of Robert Durst, who wanted her to return to their South Salem home. Witnesses who saw her that day remembered her demeanor, shifting as the evening progressed. Her mood dimmed, and she appeared reluctant to leave the city. Robert Durst later told investigators that the couple had argued that night at their South Salem cottage. He claimed that he then drove her to the Katona train station around 7:30 or 8 p.m., where she supposedly boarded a train back to Manhattan. According to this version of events, Kathleen planned to stay at their Riverside Drive apartment and attend classes the next morning. But Kathleen never showed up at school on Monday, February 1st. Her absence was immediately noticed. She was a diligent student who rarely missed class, especially so close to graduation. Friends and faculty grew concerned and tried contacting her without success. Alarmed, one of her friends broke into the Riverside Drive apartment on February 4th and found it in an unusual state, lights on, unopened mail, and a sense that nothing had been disturbed. There was no sign of Kathleen. Robert Durst did not report his wife missing until February 5th, 5 days after she was last seen. In his statement to police, he repeated the account of dropping her at the train station and claimed he had spoken with her later that night from their Manhattan apartment. He said she called to confirm her safe arrival. However, no one else reported seeing or speaking with Kathleen after she left for South Salem that Sunday evening. Police launched an investigation, but progress was slow. The case was initially handled as a routine missing person inquiry, rather than a potential foul play situation. Officers visited the couple's properties and interviewed Robert Durst. He was described as cooperative, but his statements were inconsistent and raised concerns. He also declined to take a polygraph test and later hired a criminal attorney, even though no charges had been filed. Kathleen's friends and family were not satisfied with the direction of the investigation. They pushed authorities to take a deeper look, convinced that she would not vanish voluntarily. Their efforts included distributing flyers, holding press conferences, and organizing searches. Despite this pressure, leads were scarce. The trail seemed to end the moment she was said to have entered the train station in Katona, an event that no eyewitness could confirm. Inconsistencies in Durst's timeline began to surface. There were questions about whether Kathleen had ever returned to Manhattan. The building doorman did not recall seeing her arrive. A call to the medical school on Monday morning was made by someone claiming to be Kathleen, calling in sick, but the voice was never definitively identified. These gaps fed growing suspicions among investigators and the public. Still, no body was found, and there was no physical evidence linking Durst to a crime. The case stalled. For years, it remained officially unsolved. No charges, no resolution. Kathleen Durst had disappeared into the shadows, and her husband's story remained the only account of what may have happened. The initial investigation into Kathleen Durst's disappearance was handled by law enforcement in South Salem and New York City, but coordination between jurisdictions proved inconsistent. Early on, the case was not treated as a potential homicide, a decision that would later draw criticism. Instead, it was processed as a standard missing persons report. Officers conducted interviews, gathered basic information, and performed limited searches, but no thorough forensic analysis was initiated at the time. Robert Durst maintained that he had dropped his wife off at the Katona train station on the evening of January 31st, 1982. He said she intended to return to the city to prepare for classes the next day. This account became the foundation of the timeline accepted by investigators in the earliest phase of the inquiry. However, no physical evidence confirmed Kathleen's presence at the station or her arrival in Manhattan. Detectives questioned Durst and visited the couple's South Salem home and the Manhattan apartment. Although they noted inconsistencies in his statements, no immediate steps were taken to follow up on them aggressively. He told police he had spoken with Kathleen on the phone later that night, a call allegedly made from their Manhattan apartment. Investigators were unable to confirm that this call occurred. Kathleen's friends and family were dissatisfied with the response from authorities. They reported having heard stories of emotional and physical abuse and pushed for the case to be treated more seriously. Kathleen's older sisters and college friends launched their own parallel efforts, distributing flyers, contacting media outlets, and compiling their own records of Kathleen's last known movements. By mid-February, the police investigation showed little momentum. No search warrants had been issued for Durst's properties. No forensic teams had examined the South Salem house or the Manhattan apartment for signs of foul play. Detectives did not obtain telephone records or review train surveillance footage, which at the time may not have been preserved. Investigative tools commonly used today were not applied, and some crucial windows of opportunity were lost. There were several significant delays in the investigative process. The missing persons report was not filed until 5 days after Kathleen was last seen. During this period, Durst had unfettered access to the couple's properties. When police eventually searched the locations, they found no immediate evidence of struggle or foul play. Observers later questioned whether any such evidence may have been removed or obscured in the days before law enforcement intervened. A turning point came when friends of Kathleen visited the Riverside Drive apartment themselves. They found the mail untouched, lights left on, and no signs that Kathleen had spent the night. The scene contradicted Durst's version of events. The discovery was shared with police, but no decisive action followed. The apartment was not treated as a potential crime scene. The media began to take notice as Kathleen's family gave interviews and circulated photos. Stories appeared in newspapers, and interest in the case grew. However, public attention did not translate into immediate results. The absence of a body, physical evidence, or eyewitnesses to any wrongdoing kept the case from advancing. Law enforcement refrained from naming Robert Durst as a suspect, and no charges were filed. Years passed without progress. Tips slowed, and the investigation went cold. The file remained open, but activity dwindled. The Durst family, a prominent presence in New York real estate, maintained public silence. Robert Durst returned to his life, relocating out of state and severing ties with many who had known him during his marriage. Kathleen's loved ones were left without answers, relying on memory, speculation, and scattered pieces of an incomplete narrative. The failures in the early investigation would later become a focal point in discussions about the case. Missed opportunities, procedural gaps, and reluctance to confront a wealthy and powerful individual all contributed to a long-standing void in accountability. For Kathleen's family, the lack of closure deepened the loss. They continued to insist that the investigation had been mishandled from the start, a belief that would persist for decades. Following the early stages of the investigation, the case of Kathleen Durst's disappearance faded from public attention. Despite the concerns raised by her family and friends, and the mounting inconsistencies in Robert Durst's account, no formal charges were ever filed. The absence of a body or definitive evidence of a crime left the case in limbo. As the years passed, the file remained open, but law enforcement activity dwindled. In the 1980s and early 1990s, Robert Durst lived largely under the radar. He moved away from New York and kept a low profile. Having been distanced from the Durst organization for years, he had little direct involvement with the family business. Those who remained in contact with him described a man who avoided public scrutiny and maintained tight control over his private affairs. He rarely, if ever, spoke about Kathleen's disappearance. Kathleen's family, meanwhile, continued to push for answers. Her sisters and close friends stayed in touch with authorities, wrote letters, and occasionally gave interviews in an effort to keep the case alive. Yet without new leads, there was little movement. Legal and procedural limitations restricted what could be done in the absence of concrete evidence. Over time, the investigation became one of many unsolved cases archived in local police departments. Durst's behavior during this period drew occasional attention. In the mid-1990s, his involvement in various real estate matters brought him back into the public eye, but not in connection with the disappearance. It wasn't until 1999 that the case received renewed scrutiny. Kathleen's family formally requested that authorities reopen the investigation. Their efforts coincided with a broader push in Westchester County to re-examine cold cases. Investigators began to revisit old files and interview past witnesses. That same year, a key event brought new attention: the scheduled demolition of the South Salem cottage. Kathleen's friends and family urged authorities to search the property before it was destroyed. A forensic team examined the site, but reportedly found nothing conclusive. Nonetheless, the renewed interest sparked fresh dialogue about the case and whether justice could still be served. In private, Durst's actions remained erratic. He had by then become estranged from much of his family. In 2000, a new turn in the case occurred when he re-entered the public narrative, not in connection with Kathleen, but through the sudden and mysterious death of his longtime confidant, Susan Berman. Berman, a journalist and author, had been known to defend Durst publicly in the past. Her murder, which occurred in Los Angeles in December 2000, would later be linked to the broader narrative surrounding Kathleen's fate. Meanwhile, in New York, prosecutors began to revisit old witness statements. Several individuals claimed that Berman had privately acknowledged helping Durst manage media inquiries following Kathleen's disappearance. Investigators suspected she may have had knowledge of what truly happened. The circumstances of her murder, executed with a single gunshot and no sign of forced entry, raised immediate questions about motive and connection. Although these developments occurred nearly 2 decades after Kathleen was last seen, they marked the beginning of a critical phase. Interest in the case resurfaced, legal inquiries multiplied, media coverage grew more intense, and Kathleen's family pressed harder for justice. Though many leads remained circumstantial, the emerging pattern suggested a continuity between past events and more recent tragedies. The silence of previous years had concealed important shifts. Relationships had changed, witnesses had rethought past encounters, and public interest had reignited. What had once been a cold case started to warm. The growing accumulation of indirect evidence hinted at deeper truths. Still, without a body or definitive forensic proof, the path to justice remained uncertain. For nearly 20 years, the disappearance of Kathleen Durst lingered in the shadows of legal ambiguity. But the resurfacing of related events, particularly Susan Berman's murder, signaled that the years of silence were coming to an end. The stage was being set for new revelations, ones that would connect past disappearances with present-day consequences. In 2015, public interest in Robert Durst and the disappearance of Kathleen Durst surged once again, driven by the release of the documentary series The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. Created by filmmakers who had previously explored the 2000 murder of Susan Berman, the series sought to examine Durst's connections to multiple criminal cases spanning decades. The production offered an unprecedented platform for a deeper look into Kathleen's case, and in doing so, catalyzed a series of investigative and legal breakthroughs. The filmmakers obtained hours of interviews with Durst over a span of several years. Initially cooperative, Durst agreed to participate in the project, possibly viewing it as a way to clear his name. However, as the series progressed, it exposed significant inconsistencies in his statements. Through archival footage, witness interviews, and new material, the series wove together the narratives of Kathleen's disappearance, the murder of Susan Berman, and another homicide, the 2001 killing of Morris Black in Texas, where Durst had lived under an assumed identity. The link between these events became a focal point. Kathleen's case, long dormant, was discussed extensively in the series, especially in relation to Berman. Witnesses recalled that Susan Berman had privately told friends she had helped Durst by providing an alibi or handling media inquiries when Kathleen vanished. Her murder, just before she was expected to speak with investigators, appeared increasingly connected to what she may have known. One of the pivotal moments in the documentary came when filmmakers uncovered a handwriting sample that closely resembled an anonymous note sent to police on the day Berman was killed. The note, which led officers to her body, was printed in block letters and included a misspelling of Beverly Hills. The handwriting and the misspelling appeared to match a letter written by Durst years earlier. Confronted with the comparison, Durst struggled to explain the similarity. The documentary's final episode included footage of Durst speaking to himself while alone and still wearing a live microphone. In what became one of the most widely discussed moments in the series, he said a series of phrases that included, "What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." Though disjointed and open to interpretation, the statement prompted immediate law enforcement attention. Just before the final episode aired, Durst was arrested in New Orleans by federal agents. The arrest was connected to the Berman case, but authorities made clear that Kathleen's disappearance remained an active area of investigation. The timing of the arrest, coinciding with the documentary's airing, underscored how media exposure had directly influenced the pace of legal action. Following Durst's arrest, prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions re-examined files, reviewed witness statements, and explored the possibility of linking the cases more formally. In Westchester County, where Kathleen disappeared, investigators began working with renewed urgency. New leads emerged. Statements from people previously hesitant to speak gained new weight in light of the attention generated by the jinx. Legal analysts noted that while the documentary was not a law enforcement product, its impact was substantial. It unearthed material that had not been publicly scrutinized, applied pressure on investigators, and brought renewed focus to long-dormant evidence. In doing so, it created the conditions necessary for prosecutors to act with greater clarity and public support. Kathleen's family responded with cautious optimism. For them, the documentary marked the first real movement in years. They hoped that the increased attention might finally bring answers. While no charges were yet filed in her case, the legal pursuit of Durst in connection with Berman's murder signaled that the era of silence and inaction had come to an end. What began as a documentary series became a turning point. It reconnected dots long left untouched, introduced new interpretations of old evidence, and exposed contradictions that demanded legal scrutiny. For the first time in decades, the narrative shifted from one of disappearance and frustration to one of confrontation and accountability. Robert Durst's arrest in New Orleans in March 2015 marked a dramatic escalation in the long-standing suspicions surrounding him. The charges were tied to the murder of Susan Berman, who had been found dead in her Los Angeles home in December 2000. She had been shot at close range, execution style, with no signs of forced entry. The arrest followed new forensic links and the renewed public interest generated by the documentary series. Authorities now saw Berman's death not as an isolated act of violence, but potentially as a silencing of someone who knew too much about Kathleen Durst's disappearance. Extradited to California, Durst was charged with first-degree murder in Berman's death. Prosecutors argued that he had killed her to prevent her from speaking with law enforcement about Kathleen's case, which had been formally reopened in New York. For the first time, connections between the two cases were being presented in a court of law. Investigators believed that Berman had acted as an intermediary in the early stages of the investigation, potentially impersonating Kathleen during a phone call to the medical school and helping manage Durst's response to police inquiries. As the legal proceedings in California began, prosecutors assembled a detailed case. They highlighted the similarities between the handwriting on the note that led police to Berman's body and a letter Durst had sent her years earlier. They introduced testimony from witnesses who had heard Berman speak of her willingness to protect Durst. The prosecution also drew a direct line from the renewed investigation into Kathleen's disappearance in late 2000 to Berman's murder, which occurred shortly afterward. The trial itself was delayed multiple times due to legal maneuvers and later by the COVID-19 pandemic. When it finally began in earnest in 2021, It featured dramatic testimony and new revelations. Former friends of Durst and Berman took the stand, describing decades-old conversations that took on new meaning in the context of the case. Prosecutors argued that Durst had a pattern of eliminating people who posed a threat to him, beginning with Kathleen, then Berman, and potentially others. Durst's defense acknowledged his presence in Los Angeles at the time of Berman's death, but denied he had killed her. They contended that someone else with knowledge of her past may have been responsible. They challenged the reliability of the handwriting analysis and portrayed the documentary footage as selectively edited. Despite these efforts, the cumulative weight of evidence, including the recorded audio from the Jinx, proved difficult to overcome. The most striking moment came when Durst took the stand in his own defense. He admitted to writing the so-called cadaver note sent to police, a key piece of evidence previously unacknowledged. This admission placed him at the scene of Berman's murder, contradicting his earlier denials. While he maintained he did not kill her, the jury interpreted the admission as confirmation of his involvement. In September 2021, Robert Durst was found guilty of Susan Berman's murder. The jury concluded that the killing had been deliberate and premeditated, and that its purpose was to obstruct justice in the case of Kathleen Durst. A month later, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict marked the first time Durst had been held criminally accountable for any of the deaths surrounding him. The outcome of the trial had immediate consequences. In New York, the investigation into Kathleen's disappearance moved forward with greater intensity. In 2021, she was officially declared dead, nearly 40 years after she vanished. Although no charges were filed in connection with her death at that time, the momentum from the Berman trial brought renewed focus to her case. Authorities in Westchester County signaled an active interest in pursuing further legal action. Durst's conviction closed one chapter of a complex saga, but left another still unresolved. For many, the trial provided a measure of justice, even if indirect. It confirmed that the suspicions surrounding Kathleen's disappearance had merit, and that the silence and inaction of earlier years had allowed critical evidence to go unexamined. While Durst's health rapidly declined after his sentencing, the legal and public interest in the full scope of his actions remained strong. The conviction represented a rare convergence of media, public pressure, and legal persistence. After decades of speculation and stalled investigations, the case had finally reached a courtroom, and in doing so, it brought the unresolved questions surrounding Kathleen Durst one step closer to the answers her family had long sought. Robert Durst's conviction for the murder of Susan Berman in 2021 marked the most definitive legal consequence he faced in connection with any of the high-profile deaths linked to his name. But for those who had followed the case of Kathleen Durst, the verdict only partly addressed decades of unanswered questions. Her disappearance, long suspected to be a homicide, had yet to be resolved in court. Still, momentum was finally shifting. In October 2021, just weeks after Durst's conviction, Westchester County authorities announced a renewed focus on the case. The district attorney's office publicly stated that the case had been reopened and confirmed that it was being treated as a homicide investigation. This announcement followed the formal declaration of Kathleen Durst's death earlier that year. The designation acknowledged that she had not voluntarily disappeared, but had likely died on or around January 31st, 1982. Durst's physical condition deteriorated rapidly after his sentencing. He was suffering from multiple serious health issues, including bladder cancer and COVID-19 related complications. In January 2022, while serving his life sentence in California, Durst died at the age of 78. His death occurred before any new charges related to Kathleen's disappearance could be formally brought against him in New York. Despite his death, the investigation did not end. Law enforcement officials indicated that the case remained open, with a continued focus on documenting the events surrounding Kathleen's last known moments. Her family, after 4 decades of advocacy, persisted in their call for full transparency. They continued to request the unsealing of records and the release of documents that could shed more light on what happened in 1982. In the months following Durst's death, legal teams and investigative journalists revisited the case history. Attention turned toward the actions of individuals who may have aided Durst in the aftermath of Kathleen's disappearance, including those who allegedly helped manage public messaging or misled investigators. Although no charges were filed against others, speculation persisted about whether the full scope of complicity had ever been fully explored. Kathleen's siblings, particularly her 3 sisters, remained active in public forums. They appeared in interviews, wrote opinion pieces, and met with legal officials to ensure her case would not be closed without further clarity. Their persistent advocacy had kept the case alive for decades and now served as a historical record of how families can influence the pursuit of justice long after an investigation loses momentum. The case also had a broader legacy. It sparked discussion about how wealth and influence can shape the course of criminal investigations. Durst's ability to avoid prosecution for so long, despite public suspicion and mounting circumstantial evidence, became emblematic of larger systemic failures. It raised questions about the early handling of the case, the hesitance to aggressively pursue leads, and the degree to which socioeconomic status shielded individuals from accountability. Documentary filmmakers, legal analysts, and crime historians have continued to revisit the Durst saga as a case study in how complex narratives unfold over time. From the delayed police response in 1982 to the explosive revelations in The Jinx, the story of Kathleen Durst reflects a prolonged search for justice shaped by shifting public opinion, evolving investigative practices, and persistent family advocacy. Today, no definitive resolution has been reached in terms of legal culpability for Kathleen's death. Her body has never been found. There are no official records of her final moments, yet her case remains one of the most widely recognized and discussed unsolved disappearances in modern American criminal history. Though Robert Durst is no longer alive, the legacy of the case continues. Kathleen Durst's name remains central to ongoing conversations about missing persons, domestic abuse, and the intersection of privilege and justice. Her family continues to seek full disclosure of all records and communications related to the investigation, believing that full transparency is the only way to honor her memory. The story, once buried under decades of silence, now stands as a symbol of unresolved truth and the long arc of justice. While a courtroom conviction did not come for Kathleen, the cumulative record, public, legal, and personal, suggests that her voice, though silenced in life, continues to speak through those determined to ensure her story is not forgotten.